Instructions for accessing subtitles in a language other than English are included on our board meetings webpage as well as in the description below. Instrucciones para acceder a los subtítulos en un idioma que no sea el inglés se incluyen en nuestra página web de reuniones de la Junta, así como en la descripción a continuación.
It is 6:01 and I am calling the Ross Valley School Board of Trustees special meeting to order at 6:01. Right now, Trustee Ryan O'Neill is running a little late and President Hamilton is going to be absent tonight, so you get to have me stumble through my first meeting. So be a little patient with me. So we will be having a closed session to begin. And I will be identifying the items that we will discuss in closed session. Then we will have public comment, and then we will recess to closed session. The first item we will be discussing in closed session is a conference with real property negotiators for 199 40th Avenue. We will have a conference with real property negotiators for 110 Shaw Drive. And we will have a conference with labor negotiators pursuant to Government Code 54957.6 for all employee groups, RVTA, CSEA, confidential classified, classified management, and certificated management. And then we will reconvene in open session. So I've identified all the topics of discussion. So we would like to open it up for public comment. And we have lots of cards here. I'm going to mix these up, and then I'm going to give everybody 3 minutes to talk. Is there anybody else who would like to submit one? Be happy to add it to the pile. Anyone? No? Okay. So would somebody be able to keep time for me? Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Okay. So I have Diane Vanucci. Oh yeah. And if you all could please silence your phones, I would like to be able to hear everybody, and we're recording it and broadcasting, so I want everyone to be able to hear. Thank you. And please identify yourself. Can you get there? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Diane Vanucci, a district-employed speech-language pathologist since 2002. And SLPs are required to assess and serve students who exhibit delayed articulation, vocabulary, grammar, social pragmatics, voice and stuttering disorders. The average SLP caseload is 55 students, although there's no cap. We're responsible for case management, assessments, report writing, IEP, SST, team meetings, following and developing, treatment plans, material development, and collaboration, to name a few. We receive 0 aid time, we receive 0 designated planning periods, and our work is closely monitored by the state in order to meet non-negotiable timelines. What happens when we're ill? The services stop and no one is available to complete our job responsibilities. And our work is meticulously scrutinized. Currently, I work at Hidden Valley and Manor Elementary School, serving 47 special education and response to intervention students. Due to our unfulfilled positions, in the past, I was assigned to third school, Wade Thomas, for a partial year. Additional responsibilities have included screening and assessing preschool, middle school, private school, and non-public school students, given our shortages. All in all, my knowledge base must include the age ranges of 3 to 14 years of age and associated curriculum. There's a nationwide shortage of SLPs, and it's a daunting task to try to attract and retain highly qualified SLPs who are willing to work in a school-based model for a district that does not offer competitive salaries. In the past 20 years, our district has employed 24 SLPs, myself included. It's been a constant revolving door. What must it be like for some of the most vulnerable students of our district to regularly adjust to establishing rapport with a new SLP, to struggle due to the disruption of services, and to not have services for months on end? For the reasons that my colleagues have so poignantly expressed at these board meetings, my SLP counterparts have moved on to hospitals, private schools, and other school districts who have greater opportunity for them to earn a living wage. Thank you for prioritizing and approving the union proposal as a method of attracting and retaining highly qualified district employed SLPs, which will ultimately benefit our special needs students of the district. I'm hopeful the district and RVTA will collaborate to address this current SLP need and to begin to attract and retain highly qualified specialized speech-language pathologists for our students, because our current approach does not support our vulnerable students. Thank you.
So Chris, you get a 2.5-minute warning and then,
Yes.
Perfect. William Pigtall or Jason?
Not bad.
Hard.
My name is William Pegtel. For the reasons of the logistical nightmare of my last name, I actually go by an alias on my campus as William Jameson. I am a Spanish teacher at White Hill Middle School. I am here to ask what our district leaders truly want. I've been hearing from leadership for years that students should be, quote, thriving emotionally and academically, end quote. That is from our mission statement for equity. Under our guidance and care as teachers, regardless of race, language, or any other social factor. It is a beautiful vision. I support it. I don't know a colleague who doesn't. But breaking systemic racism takes so much more than goodwill and belief. To see a new trend in student achievement where their race or economic status or language are no longer predictable indicators of success is going to take years of work with capable and experienced staff. That's where attraction and retention of highly qualified staff members has to be a top priority. It's leadership's responsibility to find solutions to complex problems, not use them as an excuse for inaction. I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard, we can't appreciate our teachers by offering competitive salaries and benefits because we don't have the money. That's been management's tune for longer than I've been here. That reasoning has been repeated so many times that it's lost meaning on us as staff. Management has made no concerted action to address the costs and revenue restrictions for so long that it is impossible to believe them when they talk of attracting and retaining. So I ask again, what do you, as our leaders, want? Our equity vision to see students thrive based on their skills and the content of their character is only achievable through a thoughtful and assertive strategy to retain the best of us. Only then can we build and maintain the anti-racist systems that we all want. This mission requires coherency and consistency so that we can capitalize on a shared depth of skills. That's what it'll take. There's no way around that. We don't have that now, and we won't have that with this district management's acutely underwhelming counteroffer for our salaries. Commit to us, take care of us, and we will stay, and we will take care of all of our students. Thank you.
Christine Palmer.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Yes. My name is Christine Palmer. I am a parent in the Ross Valley School District and have been so for the last 10 years. I am here tonight in person to show support and solidarity to the teachers of the Ross Valley School District. At our January 25th meeting, your board heard firsthand the issues facing the teachers. No doubt you will hear more tonight. What I heard was that number one, teacher turnover is too high due to lower pay compared to other Marin districts. We heard that younger teachers cannot afford to live in our district due to high costs. We heard that our teachers are challenged by large class sizes affecting student learning. And finally, we heard that our teachers are exhausted, taking on more work without adequate additional pay. And I know these are challenging times for our school district. Ross Valley is not alone in experiencing declining enrollment and funding due to fewer children in our district. This is a national trend that will likely continue for the next decade. However, we have an opportunity to gain back students that we have lost. On my residential street alone, 6 children have left the district in the last 3 years due to the pandemic. One of the most powerful selling points of this district is the fact that so many of our teachers send their own children to our schools. Our teachers are dedicated to this district. They pour their hearts and souls into our students. And we all, parents, trustees, administration, we all want the best possible outcome for our teachers. The decision comes down to investment. It is my understanding that the Ross Valley teachers are underpaid in relation to other teachers in the district. The cost in time and resources of training a new teacher is so much higher than retaining a seasoned teacher with adequate pay. So let's make an investment and send a clear message that we value our teachers and want them to stay and grow professionally here in the district. And I'm going to end by saying this. We asked so much of our teachers during the pandemic, and they delivered. It is now our turn to deliver for our teachers.
Tricia Pelleretti.
My name is Tricia Pelleretti. I'm a 3rd grade teacher at Brookside and have 2 children who also attend Brookside. This is my 5th year with Ross Valley, but my 12th year teaching. When I got my job here, I didn't know how well I would fit. I hoped for a relatively good match since it was my first position back since having a 2nd child, and I was excited to be back in a classroom. Within my first month, I was enamored and told my family I found my home. I loved the staff, the curriculum, the approaches to learning, the families, the children. I felt valued. I felt respected. I don't know if I can stay in my home any longer. I don't feel like I'm a valued partner in my home any longer. The devaluing has been building in several ways. On Friday the 13th, 3 years ago, we went home for 2 weeks. As we all know, those 2 weeks quickly turned education on its head. In a weekend, we completely transformed our curriculum, teaching style, teaching practices, and technology skills into schooling like nothing we'd ever done before. The fall of the next school year, we jumped into this new format again. We taught children in the newest ways that we could to ensure that they were learning and connecting. After a few months, we taught the concurrent hybrid model, kids in the classroom and kids on the computer screen all at once. We were never taught this style of teaching or told that this was ever even a possibility, yet we all rose to the occasion. Last year and this year, when we've finally been off of Zoom school and just together in one room, we've seen how valuable in-person connections are for students with each other and students with teachers. We were able to use our usual tools for teaching, and yet, I've had a class roster over our maximum class size agreement these 2 years back. That's at a time when we know the kids need so much more teacher time. My 3rd graders last year were sent home at the end of 1st grade. My 3rd graders this year were sent home at the end of kindergarten. Next year's 3rd graders started kindergarten on a computer screen. I want the best for my students, so I pour my best into my students. But students now need more support than they ever have. They need more academic support. They need more social support. They need more emotional support. I'm expected to provide all of that and meet growing expectations from district management. I love my students. I want the best for them. I am stretched thin in the rising number of needs paired with the rising class sizes. I worry if we are doing enough. I worry if I am doing enough. I worry about my own children. It's too expensive to have them on insurance here because there's no coverage for family members. So when my son had multiple medical emergencies at the beginning of 2023, I worried if the insurance that we had to get through the state would be adequate. I worried if he had an emergency during the day while I'm also trying to meet the expectations of district management. He's fine now, thankfully. I love teaching. I love Ross Valley and the students. I don't know if it's a sustainable relationship.
Erin Henderson.
Hi all. My name is Erin Henderson. I have two Brookside Bears. One is in kindergarten and one is in third grade. And I had an all too short but really magical time teaching at Manor Elementary School in 12 and 13 and 13, 14. Mrs. Hayhurst taught both of my boys to read and to be aspiring first-time listeners. Mrs. Pelleriti is teaching my oldest to read to learn. Third grade. Whew. Big year. I got to see Mr. Brown do Greek projects. I got to see Ms. Kaylee engage her children in project-based learning joyfully and enthusiastically. And Mrs. Vanucci and I, we supported our kids with special needs, and she is just one of the most masterful, caring clinicians that I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. I love our teachers so much. You all do too, which I completely appreciate. And so, because of what they've done for our babies and for all of us, I think it's time, because teachers, we are always asked to get creative. I think it's time, because I completely appreciate the funding model of our district is unique and bizarre and can be challenging. The board needs to be creative with finding different ways. If it's figuring out how to pool buying power at the county office for medical benefits, if it's figuring out different sorts of bond, the whole county should be doing a little bit better, but we have to get creative. It's time to buckle down and get creative, because teachers are tired. Gosh, they're tired. I'm tired, and I loved Manor so much, but I could not afford to insure my family, and my oldest son had epilepsy, and so I had to go, and it was devastating. Walking away from Manor was a really, really difficult thing to have to do. I can't even imagine how difficult it would be for teachers who have been here and loved our babies for 5 and 10 and 15 years. So I do. Tonight I would just like to encourage outside the box thinking and creativity that we ask our teachers to engage in every day, because they're worth it and they deserve it, and we love them very much. Thank you.
Alex Openshane.
Hello, I'm Alex Obenshane, or Mr. O. And some people who know me have described me as being sometimes overly positive and hopelessly optimistic, or in a word, naive. And I don't really take that as an insult when working with middle schoolers. I think we can all use a healthy dose of positivity and optimism. Our kids most of all, as they're faced with this increasingly challenging and scary world. But personally, when I've received the offer of a raise that is less than half of the rate of inflation, it's hard for me to be optimistic, and it's hard for me to be positive, and I'm feeling a little bit dejected and demoralized. And so I want to highlight some of the goals that are on our district website. There are 3 goals, and within each of those goals are objectives. Goal 1, Objective B, is to identify and develop teacher leaders to support best practices in instruction. To do this requires 2 things: attracting high-quality teachers and retaining our strongest teachers so they can be the teacher leaders that we want and need. The offered raise of less than half of the rate of inflation will achieve neither of those things, and our students will ultimately suffer from a lack of consistency from departments shifting priorities and goals every year as they're completely rebuilt due to our revolving door retention practices. Goal 2, Objective C on our district website, is to utilize focused and differentiated strategies to engage all students in learning. These strategies are amazing and take time to develop. And by the time our teachers develop these skills and these strategies, many of them decide it's time to leave for better pay. The offered raise is not going to slow that tide. If anything, it's going to speed it up. Goal 3, Objective C. Support, nurture, value, and maintain high-quality professional certificated, classified, and administrative staff. I'm not going to spend much time talking to this point because that's why we're all here. These 3 goals and these objectives within them are worthy goals. They're goals which will benefit our school, our students, and our entire school community and allow us to grow into an even better, stronger school for this fantastic community that we find ourselves a part of. These goals will allow us to get the absolute best out of our already incredible students, but these goals require meaningful investments into the teachers who spend their days doing all that they can to help our students find success and find their place in our community and the world at large. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Right. Thank you for your public comments. And we are going to recess into closed session at this time, so we would need to clear the building. Thank you all. Thank you. All right, it is 7:12 and we are reconvening back in open session. We have procedural items that we need to address right now. So the first would be the Pledge of Allegiance. Traditionally, President Hamilton generally gives a moment of reflection on this. I'm just going to reflect on the fact that I am sitting up here for the first time, and this is all new from this particular seat, and it's I'm representing people in our community, including our teachers and our families and our students, and I'm here for the benefit of you all and to make sure that we guide our district in the best possible manner. And so that is what I will be reflecting on as I say the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you would all join me in standing and pledging. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next matter is adopting the agenda and time allocations. So, somebody like to make a motion?
I will make a motion to adopt the agenda.
No changes or anything?
No changes or edits.
Second?
I second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Chris?
Aye.
Danny?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
And Rachel, aye. All right, so we have an adopted agenda for tonight. And I'm going to report out from closed session. We will be continuing it after the regular session. We had no decisions made. No action was taken. Next item is correspondence and communication to the board. There are attachments there. And Marcy, did we receive anything else?
We have only one that we added today, since the agenda went live on Friday.
And so we all had a chance to read those. Thank you. And then, did we have correspondence and communication regarding RVSD's home to school transportation plan?
No.
Okay. So moving on to E, presentation and action items. So we now have public comment regarding items on the open session agenda. I have a few comment cards here. And just because this is a special board meeting, the Brown Act requires that when you are speaking, it has to be specifically to what is on our agenda. Otherwise, we're not allowed to hear it as a public comment. So just make sure that your comments are reflective of what is on our agenda. And then I'm just going to call people up, and you will have 3 minutes. Chris, can you keep time again? Okay, so he'll give you a 2.5 minute little ding on his phone, and then you have 30 seconds left to finish your comment. Kristen Ellis?
Okay, this won't take 3 minutes. So I'm here in regards to the budget, specifically teacher compensation. My concern is, my understanding is that we have have been unable to come to an agreement between teachers and the board regarding teacher compensation. My concern is that if we can't come to a satisfactory agreement here, we're gonna lose very good teachers within this district, which is gonna result in students leaving our schools. That's why most of us moved to this area, was for the schools. And certainly people in this district can afford to go to private schools. That will absolutely happen if we can't retain teachers. So while I understand there are challenges within our budget, I think that if we don't take a long-term view here and understand that losing teachers will negatively impact and continue to have impact on our budget for the years to follow, we're gonna be facing much bigger problems. So I think that we really have to be able to find some way to appease our teachers and be able to keep them happy in where they are, or again, we're just gonna make this problem bigger and bigger. I think probably we all need to be addressing this at a state level. I do understand that your hands are tied with the amount of revenue that comes in. I completely appreciate that problem. I actually work in finance and have to deal with budgets all the time. So, you know, I just really beg of you that you do whatever you can to not lose our teachers, because this is the heart of our community, and we're gonna be facing very big problems if we can't retain the good people that we have right now. And that was it. It was under 3 minutes.
Megan Keene.
Hi, my name is Megan Keene. I have a first grader at Brookside, an incoming kindergartner next year, also will be at Brookside, and I am a product of Ross Valley School District. I attended both Wade Thomas and White Hill, and as was just mentioned, my family moved back here because of the schools and the quality of education that is available from Ross Valley School District. I am empathetic that you are all under a very very hard position, and I have heard that has been referred to as an unsolvable problem, and that cannot be the case. We can't afford to lose our teachers. We can't afford to have the quality of education for our children suffer. My concern is that I have been doing a lot of research and trying to understand what is going on, as have a lot of my parent friends. And there is a lack of transparency in the budget and the line items and where money is going that makes it really hard for us to be empathetic to the situation that's happening. But it also means that brilliant minds within this community, literally leaders of businesses that run this country, both across finance and tech, and you know this, are in this community, and we could help find solutions and try to be a part of building the solutions to this problem, but we have no insight into what's actually going on. We don't know where the money is going. We don't understand what percentage of the budget is actually going to teacher salaries. So it's really hard for any of us to feel like everything that can be done is being done, because we have very little insight into what's actually happening. So that's it.
Anna Welch.
Hi, I'm Anna Welch. I'm a Hidden Valley parent. I have a 5th grader and a 3rd grader and a preschooler who will be a kindergartner next year. So I have seen firsthand very many of the teachers at Hidden Valley, and they're wonderful. And when new people come in and they ask, how are the schools? My answer is not, the grounds are beautiful, that, anything about the physical school. It's the people, it's the teachers. So the teachers are a linchpin of our community. They're the reason people come. They support our property values that way. If our schools are bad, then our homes are not worth as much. So it's in the interest of everyone to kind of get creative with the budget. I don't know if you can shift money around, if you can get creative with getting alternative sources of money. But if we can't pay our teachers, then our schools are really nothing without them. Thank you.
Please state your name.
Yo Yoshida. I have a third grader at Hidden Valley. I was fortunate enough to meet with Marcy and the business manager, Chris, a couple weeks ago. And the question came up around Me Too, which is the administrative budget in which the teachers get an increase means also all the administrators. I'm curious to know if you've been able to figure out what the administrative discrepancy is between the other districts, if that's been possibly published yet for us, and also kind of what percentages are being allocated in context to administration versus teachers, and are you looking at this overall budget specifically for the teachers, or is this including all the administration, and what percentage is that? Thank you.
Any further public comments? Okay, so we're going to move into the presentation and discussion on public education funding, state budget, and implications for district expenses.
Grab
something.
So we do agree that tonight is a very important agenda topic, because just listening to folks who've spoken, not just at tonight's meeting, but in past meetings, and also the many emails that we've gotten, to really understand the revenues that come in from the state, as well as what our local and federal revenues are, and to looking at how we spend the money that we do have in the district. And so tonight we're hoping that will help to answer, we tried to cover all of the questions that we received, to anticipate then how maybe some of the questions that have been asked, even with a response that we'll see tonight, may implore more questions. And so how can we be sure? Just to start, we absolutely do, just like all of you, value our teachers, value all of our employees in the Ross Valley School District. So besides teachers, we also have classified employees. Those are our front office folks at the schools, our custodians, noontime supervisors, all the folks who have non-certificated positions. So besides the teachers. We have another classification of employees called confidentials, and there are only 2 in the entire district, and they're folks who, one is in the HR and one is Teresa, and the reason that a confidential position can be maintained is not having to do confidentiality around not sharing information, what they might learn in the course of their duties and responsibilities, but having potentially having information related to negotiations or salary conversations, that if you need classified employees to help with getting any of that information out of our systems or so on. They're the kinds of positions that can help. And then we have administrative. So we have site administrators and district office. So besides Eric and Julia and Chris and myself, we have Sean Maher, who is our Director of IT, and Des McKissick, who's our Director of Maintenance and Operations. And so those are the employee groups that we have in the Ross Valley School District, and we definitely value our teachers as well as all of our employees in our school district. So we're hoping that tonight's presentation, what we're going to cover tonight is simply the revenues and expenses. Tonight, the agenda, in speaking with the Brown Act, any future conversations that we want to have around possibly how to get more money, we can touch on this evening, but we won't be able to discuss that on this evening because it wasn't agendized, as well as if the flip side of that is, in order to have everything that we want, then we may have to take a look and make some really hard decisions, but that's not the purpose of tonight's meeting, and I'm hopeful that everything that we have going on, that we won't get to that point in our school district. But we have had to do cuts in the past, and that may be very well something that we have to look at again as we go forward. And so I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Chris, thank you. And then how we also designed this is to have there are a number of slides, as you may have seen with what's before you. And so knowing that it would be a lot of information to get through all in one fell swoop, if any of the trustees have questions or clarification comments that you wish to make as we're going through, please don't hesitate to interrupt Chris and or me. And then for any members of the public, there will be a time after the presentation and where there will be more opportunity for public comment. Now, part of the way that the Brown Act works is that the public comments, we can receive them, but it's not a discussion or a back and forth. And so, unfortunately, we may not be able to respond, but what the trustees can do is if you all have, maybe the same question or maybe it was explained in such a way that it needs clarification, we certainly can do that part. And then, of course, this doesn't have to be our only meeting. So we can have future topics as well if there's more information that is needed and wanted, and we didn't get to it tonight.
So thank you for the opportunity to discuss the budget this evening. As you know, it's something that I truly love, and I get excited when I do talk about it. What we'll be discussing this evening are some basic budget terms, looking at our demographics, looking at budget assumptions and considerations, our revenues and expenses, and our multi-year projections and ending balances. In terms of budget terms, I put these together just in case I say something that you may not understand what the term is. I've just provided a little background on it. So we talk about things like the cost of living, the COLA, the local control funding formula, LCFF, enrollment, ADA, those types of things. And also community funded and state aid funded status. And we've provided a basic explanation of what those terms mean. What I wanted to start with this evening really first is just taking a look at our general fund. You'll hear me talk about our general fund, our general fund, our general fund. What is that? That is where we receive and spend all of the dollars of the district for our education purposes. And so when looking at it in terms of our revenues, which are on the left, and our expenses that are on the right, what you will notice is that in terms of revenues, our local control funding formula, LCFF revenues, are 60.8% of our total revenues. The other thing that's important to note is our parcel tax, which is 14.4%. When you combine those two, that is 75.2% roughly of our total revenues that we receive. When you contrast that against our expenses, the first thing you see is salaries and benefits. That's our single largest source, which is 75.5%, which is in line with those other two. The reason I'm pointing that out is because we are in the people industry, and you would expect to have our single largest source of expenses to be in people, and that bears out. And just as an aside, I know there was a question in terms of, there have been questions in terms of how much goes towards classroom expenses, and we actually have a form that gets calculated as part of our unaudited actuals. And when looking at our total general fund last year, we actually had spent 60.69% of our total expenses towards classroom expenses. What that means is teacher salaries and instructional aid salaries that are directly in the classroom, which is for a district such as ours, an elementary district, we have a requirement to spend at least 60%. And so for us, we are above that. Another thing that is important to note as we move forward, when we talk about what does a salary settlement look like, when looking at, we talk about what does 1% cost, what does 1%, and what we're talking about are salaries and statutory benefits. And so for every 1% that we would offer for the teachers, our VTA, it's $115,805. You can see our CSEA and our management and the total cost for the district-wide. And understand that when talking about staff, it takes everybody in the district to run the district. And so it's $179,269 for the cost of 1%.
And when we were talking about what is a need to, what we've historically done in the district is whatever we provide to the teachers, that same percentage increase has been given to the other employee groups. So not just to administration, but to the classified and the confidentials as well as the teacher. So that's what we've historically done here. Some other districts do a variety of different methods where they might give more to one group than another, and it could be 1 year the teachers get more, classified may get more, and so on. In no way in our district have we ever given more to, at least in my 31 years of being here, it's been the same across the board for all employee groups when we have settled.
Chris, can you just for slide number 4, go back and for transparency, just explain what the 814,806, which is the 644,806 and 170, the other outgo and capital outlay, just to, for transparency, understand what that is.
And so when looking at it, you're talking the capital outlay and the other outgo?
Other outgo, right.
So capital outlay is, we have a requirement to set aside 3% of our general fund for what is called routine restricted maintenance. And we have to spend those dollars towards maintaining the facilities and also paying our staff that are in maintenance and operations. And anytime you do something such as do a new roof, paint the school, anything like that, it has to be paid for out of that 3% requirement. And if you don't spend those dollars, they also get carried over because it's on the restricted side of our general fund. And so we maintain those and have to spend them in that way. And so they would be unavailable for other things other than that. And that's what you see under the capital outlay. It's all under routine restricted maintenance. In terms of other outgo, it's things such as we have an encroachment onto the general fund from our cafeteria fund for our food service program. It doesn't fully fund itself. That's one of the things that's in there. Another thing that gets thrown into that category are things such as indirect costs. For categorical programs, we can charge a certain amount, a percentage for indirects, and so that's part of what you're seeing there. You're also getting other expenses such as interest income, and so for example, we have a lease for technology for Chromebooks, and so the principal and interest would go into that category as well.
Thank you.
Moving on to our actual demographics. Demographics are really important when looking at our total general fund. And the reason is because they really do start to drive our revenues. And when looking at it, there's been an issue, and I have 2 articles which are pointed to from the Marin Independent Journal that shows that the county has an enrollment trend of going down. And that's important to note. And one of the articles talks about a 10% since the pre-pandemic, countywide. It's also important to note that there is a statewide enrollment trend going down. And as you look at it, there's also an enrollment trend going down for the Ross Valley School District. And the one thing I do want to point out, beyond that we have a trend going down, well, 2 things. One is that between our adopted budget and really our first and second interim budgets, we have seen an increase in our enrollment from what we estimated. That's a positive. And the other thing that is really important to note is built into our projections for those out years, we also have the expansion of the TK program. So we're actually expanding our grade levels at the same time. But you're not seeing a big increase. It's relatively flat and still trending down, even with that additional grade being built up. And so that really does support the fact that we are continuing a trend of downward for enrollment. And with enrollment being one of the things that you really have to look at and keep an eye on because it does impact your revenues indirectly. That's an important thing to keep an eye on. When looking at our budget assumptions and considerations, we talk about enrollment, but really that's not how we get paid. We get paid based upon our average daily attendance. And so what is average daily attendance? Average daily attendance is simply a measure of how many kids actually come to school each day. And there is a perception in the public that when their child doesn't come to school and they call in and let them know to get it excused as an absence, that we get funded for it. We really don't. It doesn't impact whether we get funded or not. If the child is present, we get funded for that day of attendance. If they don't, we do not get funded.
And the state of California hasn't funded that way since the 1980s. And the only other way that we can receive the funding is in accordance with the independent study program. And under that, as an option, the state requires that there be a minimum number of days absent of 3. And so there has to be meeting that threshold. And since COVID, the state has tightened up on what the independent study requirements are. Prior to COVID, there could just be a packet of work that's provided to the students. But since COVID and the state really focused on learning recovery and making sure their kids don't fall further behind, there are requirements for a certain number of minutes that the work assigned to the child must cover. And so there's a minimum number of minutes. And then at the middle school level and even high school, but we don't have high school in our district, so we'll talk about that. But there's also the requirement for synchronous weekly instruction. So when children are out of school, and of course we're seeing more absences because of illness for sure, absolutely. So with COVID, and it's kind of interesting because California is one of the states that requires or provides payment based on average daily attendance. Other states provide it based on enrollment, and California doesn't do that. So when we look at, and we'll get deeper into the slides here a little later to show kind of where we are looking at our enrollment, but then our average daily attendance and what percentage we have of kids attending. So it's really difficult that the state and especially so much prior to the emergency orders ending around COVID, is we don't want folks in school, whether they're children or adults, if they're sick, because then that can get transferred to someone else and then somebody else misses school or work. And so we understand that there's a natural decline in our attendance. And then, of course, with the specific requirements too of the independent study, it does limit the ability for a lot of children to take advantage of that, or families, if they're taking, let's say, the Friday off before a break, or a Monday in return. It makes it very hard because it does require a 3-day minimum in order to do that. And then there are re-engagement requirements too, that if the child doesn't turn the work in accordance with whatever's put into place in that independent study plan, is that there has to be an attempt to engage with the family and the child to get them to participate in their independent study work. So it puts a lot, and we do imagine that specifically required as part of the state's plan with independent study audits. And so we also need to be really careful that we're implementing independent study the way that the state outlines. Otherwise, if we're audited, we will end up not getting the money after all. So we need to just make sure we're following what the state requirements are around that.
Chris, can I ask a clarifying question? So with the local control funding formula, let's call it 19 million. We're really only getting 93% of that 19 million?
No. If the calculation shows that it's 19 million, you would get that, but you could go up an additional 7% if you had 100% attendance. So whatever the calcalated revenue is,
that's
that is
based on the 93%
yes.
of our...
Yes, that's correct.
But it could be 7% higher.
Correct.
Or 1.5% higher back to our average, or 2.5% higher to the 95.
That's absolutely correct. And kind of going back to that, we had talked about having an increase in our enrollment from adopted to second interim. But if you look at the top left chart, you actually see our ADA that we're showing is dropping. And the reason for that is we had budgeted an attendance rate of 95.5%. And our historical average is actually 96%. But what we have seen at second interim is that we have an attendance rate that's lower than that. And so we budgeted it down to 93. And we did slightly drop our other 2 years. And I do want to add one thing. I keep talking about 3 years worth of projections. And when we look at our fund balances, I also talk about 3 years. One of the things that's really important to note is the school district doesn't just do a 1-year budget. We do a 3-year budget. That's required by law. And so we always talk about multi-year projections. We have to do the current year budget plus the following 2. And so you'll always see me talking about 3 years and current year plus 2. So I want to point that out. And so looking at our attendance rates, we are actually dropping in attendance as well. And so that does have a negative impact on our revenues as we move forward, again, because that's how we get funded based upon our attendance. And there is another factor that impacts our revenues, and that has to do with what we call the COLA, the cost of living adjustment. And what that does is it starts to talk about how much funding you would get per student, not total necessarily directly. And so what we had budgeted at adoption for the current year was a 6.56% COLA. Our budget was adopted, we had our first reading at the beginning of June, second reading and adoption in the middle of June. At the end of June, the state adopted a budget of 13.26%. So that was good news. And then at the January governor's proposal for the budget next year, he proposed an 8.13% for next year. And so you do see the differences between the COLAs within our multi-year projections. And it is positive that we have those higher numbers, but there are also risks as we move forward looking at the 8.13. And I know I've talked about that at second interim budget, but we won't get into that this evening. When looking at, and this information comes from School Services of California, and School Services keeps this running list of what our statutory COLA is versus the funded COLA and what the deficit is. Now, statutory COLA is what the state owes us, funded COLA is what they give us, and deficit is if they're going to give us even less, they might actually take money away from us. And the reason I'm showing this is because if you look at the circle for 22-23 and 23-24, our funded COLAs for those 2 years are anticipated to be 2 of the highest percentages that we have seen since 1990. And so that's really an important thing to understand. The other thing that's important to understand is as we start to look at potentially a recession, there are risks to the funded COLA, and we could see a deficit. We haven't had one since 2012-13, which at that point we had a 22% deficit. So that's always something we just need to keep in the back of our minds. When looking at our expenses, one of the things that we as a district must pay for, and it's called statutory benefits, and it's employer paid, is the pension costs. And so for the teachers and certificated staff, including certificated administrators, the district is paying 19.1%. And last year we paid 16.92%. So there was an increase of 2.18% that the district is paying for every dollar that we spend in certificated salaries. We're paying $2.18 cents more to the state for that pension. And the reason I point that out is because as you look back to 2013, we had a rate of 8.25%. And so the district has seen almost an 11% increase in our CalSTRS costs during that period. And that is significant. These percentages for STRs are built into to code, into statute, meaning that it would take a change in the statute to increase these, but that's what we have for now. And I know I have talked about that in the past. For the classified staff, people like myself and our instructional aides and the office staff, etc., we pay into the CalPERS system, and for CalPERS, currently we're paying 25.37%. We're estimated to go to 27% next year. The reason I'm saying estimated and not certain is because it's not built into statute for CalPERS. It's based upon actuarial studies that generally come out in the middle of May. So I will know what that final percentage is in the middle of May. And it can change. And based upon the information that they have, they expect it to go up. What I do want to point out is that back around the same time that the CalSTRS rates were going up, the CalPERS rates were in the 13% range. So there's been a significant spike in those costs as well. So as we start to look at our revenues and expenses, we've had some questions regarding our property taxes and whether we're in community funded status versus state aid. And what I want to point out, and I've added something to the slide on the left, because of that large 13.26% super COLA, the district is expected to stay in state aid funding, meaning that our property taxes will not exceed our calculated local control funding formula amounts. And so we are going to remain funded solely based upon our average daily attendance, our funded average daily attendance. And so that's really important to note. Now,
Chris, can I ask a question?
Yes.
How many other districts or schools are in that same funding bracket? How does that compare to other schools here in Marin?
So when looking in Marin County, there are 19 districts, which includes the County Office of Education, and there are only 3 of us that would fall into the state aid funding on the left side. The other 16 are funded solely on their property taxes. They're community funded.
And is the assumption that those districts are funded at a higher rate?
You get paid the higher of your property taxes or your calculated local control funding formula based on attendance. So if they are community funded, they would receive more per child.
And Chris, it's true that we don't choose that way of funding. We are mandated to, they tell us how we are going to be funded, right? We can't say, oh, I think we're going to choose state or community, correct?
It depends on what your property tax base is.
Right.
So if your property taxes come in higher than your calculated LCFF, then you're community funded. So it's really whichever is higher for you.
And you're right, you don't choose.
You don't choose.
You don't choose.
Yeah.
It chooses for you.
It chooses for you. I wanted to make sure we were clear about that.
It's whichever your students get the most money.
Yes.
So theoretically, if they drastically drop the COLA and say that, state taxes are a lot lower than they anticipated, they adjust the state budget and then they hack a bunch of money out of the budget for schools. All right, COLA goes down dramatically, it could flip us back over to the other funding model.
It could. Okay. It could. Right now, we're not estimating that, but that's based upon those projections from the County Office of Education and the larger state group, BASC.
So just a question about property tax. And during the pandemic, it seemed like everybody was moving to Marin, and our property values overnight went to we're bazillionaires, or that AT&T commercial, right? Or billionaires. Is that not true?
Our property taxes did go up a great deal,
but it's not affecting enough to change this.
Correct, because the only time that those property taxes get reassessed are when the title changes. So if you have somebody that's lived in their house for 30 years, the maximum amount of increase based upon Prop 13 is only 2%. And so you could have an assessed value on a home that somebody's owned for 30 years of really nothing. And you have somebody next door who just bought their house and their assessed value is could be several $1 million, and they'll be paying much more in property taxes.
And is it true that San Anselmo and Fairfax residents are here longer? There's not as much turnover in those home ownership, so that's why it's not as great.
One of the things that we looked at when we refinanced the bonds, we had general obligation bonds that we refinanced last summer, and to save the taxpayers money. One of the things that the financial analyst looked at is he was looking at what our assessed valuations are, and one of the things he said is your assessed values for Marin County are very low. And the reason is because they've held on to them for so long. So based upon that, I would say absolutely that's true. And he's looking down to all of the assessed valuations. He sees all of that data.
Is that different if you can, like, compare to Mill Valley or Tiburon, where are people moving out of those homes more frequently so the property values continue to go up and the property tax continues to go up?
Yes.
Because we're sitting on our properties longer, we're at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say yes.
So you might say people like it here more.
Because of our teachers.
So looking at our funding model, one of the other things that happened this year when they adopted the budget in the end of June 2022, they changed the way
When the
they
state
looked.
adopted the
The
budget,
state,
not us.
not
We
us.
didn't change it.
The state. One of the things that the state did is they changed how we calculate our funded average daily attendance. We used to be given what's called a 1-year hold harmless for declining enrollment and declining attendance. And so what that meant is that as you were looking at your attendance, you were funded at either your current year attendance or your prior year attendance, whichever was higher. Again, similar to property taxes, you get the higher of the two. And so it was the current year or prior year. What they've noticed and made the change moving forward is that because there were a number of districts that had some large drops in their attendance, they were going to have large drops in their revenues. So they changed that funding model to add one additional look at. And so we now have the higher of your current year attendance, your prior year attendance, or the 3 prior years of attendance, the average of those. And so what that does is it because our enrollment and attendance dropped so much, it makes our average daily attendance that we're funded on much higher. And so you start to see that in 21-22. And this chart is designed to show that. We had a ADA at that point of 1668 and funded at 1966. Well, you start to see our funded ADA drop down to 1880 versus 1617. Then it drops to 1762 as, again, we're looking at our multi-year projections and those calculations. And so you're starting to see that gap close as we start to, that 3-year average starts to drop based upon looking at our current year average. But the reality is, as you do that calculation, it could, even though we might have a 13.26% COLA on our LCFF per student, this also has a negative impact on your total revenues.
And how is 2021 flat because of remote learning?
It is, the way they did that, they did not have us take attendance the way we would normally. They told everybody, just use your attendance from your previous year.
Okay.
And so that's the reason
I see
you see
that.
that.
It matches, yes, 2019.
So how do we compare in Ross Valley with this approximate, whatever it is, 250 students leaving from the 1920 year to the 2021? If whatever that math, hope there's no math teachers here. But that decrease compared, because did everybody just go to other schools, or did they leave California? Did they just leave Fairfax and San Anselmo?
They left everywhere, and some districts had larger drops than others. In our case, we had the highest drop immediately after the COVID shutdown of any of the districts in the county. And so that's one of the negative factors. The other thing that people start to ask is, are they going to private schools? Are they going to other districts in the county? Are they going out of state? Well, the local information on private schools show that they had drops as well. Charter schools had drops. Local districts, you saw the slide from earlier that showed the Marin IJ article that showed a 10% drop countywide since the pandemic. And again, for districts that are community funded, that's actually good news for them because they're still getting paid the same dollars on property taxes, where we're actually seeing a drop. But then kind of going back to what I was sharing, statewide, you see a drop in enrollment. And so it's really, they were leaving California. And that did pan out as we were looking at our numbers. We were tracking as best that we could those students that were leaving, and it was over 50% of them left the area altogether. They didn't just leave Ross Valley.
But more so than other Marin schools.
Yes. Now, I did want to share kind of this is actually a screenshot of our LCFF calculator. And this is the top part of the calculator that shows how everything gets calculated. And when you look at 22-23, which you see in the middle section, and then 23-24 to the right, I've highlighted both our average daily attendance as well as our unduplicated pupil count. Now, I haven't been talking about the unduplicated pupils. That does give additional dollars, and so you do see some districts that have higher unduplicated pupil counts receiving larger amounts in total. But for us, it is a low figure, and so this calculation is pretty straightforward as you look. There's a certain ADA that we have to calculate across different grade spans. You see the grade spans, then you get different funding amounts per child, and based upon your supplemental and concentration, which are your based upon your unduplicated pupils, and it calculates out. And so when looking at 22-23, that's where that $19 million comes from. For 23-24, you see the drop in funded ADA and our LCFF revenues. When moving forward, all I did is kept the 23-24 up there just so people could see those numbers. And then looking at 24-25, I want to point out, based upon our drop in funded average daily attendance, our actual LCFF revenues are going down. And so that's really critical to note.
And the LCFF calculator isn't something that Chris creates, it is provided. So it's kind of, you put your data in there, your information, and it calculates what it is for you. So you can play around with it to some degree, but it's got to be based on your actual numbers. And then as anybody knows that our teachers have to take attendance daily, and in our elementary and at the middle school, it's period by period attendance. And so then the teachers also have to certify that the attendance that they took is accurate and correct, and so on. So then that information helps to provide the information that helps to determine what is our funded COLA or funded amount of revenues, ADA.
And because this is our single largest source of revenues, it's one of the most heavily audited sections for us. And so they're auditing both our attendance as well as our unduplicated pupils. And we have to give them our LCFF calculator as well. So they're looking right down to that level and verifying all of the data.
Chris, and unduplicated, that's foster youth, homeless,
English
language learners. And so we have a very low percentage of those students in our district compared to other districts as well. And so if you happen to have more of those students, you would get a higher amount of more money.
Concentration dollars, what they call concentration dollars, to help support your unduplicated students.
Yeah. And so you'll see that we don't show any dollars under concentration because we don't have enough that percent would have to be, it used to be 55, I think it's 60 now, percent of your population, and you get concentration. And so you do get them for your supplemental. For the 12.27% of our children, we get supplemental dollars.
Has that gone up at all over the past?
It does. It changes slightly with our COLA as well. And so what you'll see is those numbers tie to our LCAP as well. With the variations in the LCFF calculator from each period, they change a little, but in the end, that's what we look at for the LCAP is the amount that's under our supplemental and concentration dollars within the calculator.
And some districts in Marin do have a high enough concentration where they do
makes a difference. That's I figured that as much. I don't think we've ever even been close to being that high.
No.
And what does LCAP mean?
The Local Control Accountability Plan, and we have to write a plan annually that discusses how we will increase student achievement with these supplemental dollars. And so it's a pretty intensive plan that is done annually.
And what the state is talking about is, as they've seen more and more districts utilize their supplemental and or their concentration dollars on giving raises, they're looking at how do they approach our LCAP template to ensure that where the state intended those dollars to go towards ensuring that closing the achievement gap for the unduplicated students is actually going to happen. So there are some of the districts that have been utilizing those dollars for increases when the state comes in, and there will be in pretty much every year since the LCAP came out, there's been revisions to it. And so we've not had, and it's been out for at least 8 years, I want to say. At least eight, that every year is a different template. And so we're always learning about what is the updates and changes to that so that we can be sure that we're in compliance.
We have had a number of questions related to how is the district funded in relation to other districts in the county. And so the one thing I was interested in is looking at both the parcel tax, because that is generally for salaries and benefits, and also the local control funding formula calculations. So what I did is I actually went to each of the districts in the county and pulled their financial statements for the unaudited actuals for last year. The unaudited actuals are you report them by September 15th each year, and it's how you closed your books for the previous year. And so these end up into your audited financial statements as well. And so when I pulled that data, what you see is that Ross Valley is the third lowest in the county. And there's only 2 districts that are lower than us. One of them is very, very slightly less than us, Miller Creek, but Novato is the other one. And then you see districts off towards the left, and you see some pretty large amounts. That's not unusual. Part of the problem with looking at this data is the small districts often do have larger amounts per child. And a lot of that has to do with them being a small district or additional dollars they might get, but also they have some large expenditures, large parcel taxes as well as their property taxes. And keep in mind that we only have 2 other districts that are state aid funded, which means that they're funded based upon attendance. And those 2 districts are San Rafael Elementary and Novato, other than us. And so you'll notice that the 3 of us are right in those bottom 4.
And then some districts in Marin that are basic aid, they go in and out of basic aid. So it depends annually. And so thinking about those districts, like Miller Creek has been one, where they're referred to as teeter districts, where they go in and out. So those districts are planning for 2 budgets because not knowing if they will be in community funded status the following year or if they will be in revenue limit or state aid funded.
Again, looking at our per funded average daily attendance, looking at our second interim budget, I again, pulled their financial statements for the second interim and looking at that same data. And we're still sitting third from the bottom. And I do want to point out that our total growth is not the 13.26%, it's 12.6%, but that's because I'm also including that parcel tax, and the parcel tax does not get that COLA. It's based upon our calculated amount, which is you have a 3% increase plus any changes for people who go in and out based upon their age, because they have the ability to opt out of it at a certain age, and so that does impact your revenues. So looking at it, we do see a per student increase in funding at 12.6%. Now, why that's important, looking at the per student funding, when looking at those two districts that were just to the left of us, so a little bit more funding than us, you look at Larkspur, Corte Madera, and also San Rafael Elementary. And when you look at the per student funding, the difference between the funding per average daily attendance is $330.05 for Larkspur. And let's just say our average class size across the district, TK through 8, is 25. That would be $8,251 per class difference from Larkspur. For San Rafael, it's $1,000 difference, and that calculates out to the $25,395 more money per classroom. I want to stress that, because those are pretty large differences. And then you move over to the other districts, and those are going to be quite a bit more. But the two that were closest to us, those are the differences. And there's a lot of things that could be done with that on a per classroom basis with those funds. And so that does have a direct impact upon our ability.
So two questions. This one is, why does it seem exponential? Why is it so much higher, more money per classroom per year?
Because you have, for San Rafael, they have a higher unduplicated pupil count than us, and so they're getting funded more. They also have a different parcel tax, and I'm not sure how that equates into that, but they're, as a total, they have more per student. For Larkspur, Corte Madera, they're actually a community-funded district, and so theirs is based upon their property taxes, and so that's the reason that theirs is.
And so would these numbers be even higher for the Shoreline, Lagunitas, Ross?
Absolutely.
And these are just two that Chris pulled, right near us in terms, on the previous slide, just to look at the calculations. He didn't do this kind of a thing across the board. But as you notice, look at Bellina Stinson. Their interim budget per student funding since last school year, that was ours. Their per student funding is $54,730.42. And that is wow, how can that possibly be? And one of the reasons that, that's not the district, but there is Shoreline as an example. They have a lot of money because they are part of the state park, and so they get additional funding from the federal government that no other district in Marin gets. And looking at kind of overall in terms of the number of districts in the entire state of, let's say there are roughly 1,000 school districts in the state of California, approximately 46 school districts in the state of California are community funded. And of those, 16 of them live in Marin County. And so thinking about, there is a school district, and Reed School District did this analysis many years ago, and it was really great when I saw that on their website a few years ago, is looking at, there is a school district in the Central Valley, deep central, closer to Bakersfield area. And they are a community funded or basic aid school district, and the reason that they are is because they have oil wells in their, the property of their school district.
Taft.
I think it's a little higher than Taft, more north. But they're not a very wealthy basic aid or community funded district. So even when we thought we were going to be in community funded, just the other thing that happens is that with that is we weren't going to be able to get to keep all of the dollars that would have been brought in from our property taxes, because there's what's called the in lieu property taxes that the district would have had to pay on a per pupil basis to every one of our residents of Fairfax or San Anselmo who are attending Ross Valley Charter. And so by the time we took those in lieu property tax calculations out of our budget as we were looking, it would have netted, which would have been amazing and fantastic, still about an $800,000 increase to our budget. And then when the state put in place the additional COLA added to what they were originally telling us they were going to do, and sometimes it occurs where the state does pass its budget after school districts have adopted their budget. And so that's why in September when we returned, Chris had done a 45-day budget revision that you all looked at and approved at the September board meeting, because if the state adopts its budget after our school district does, Chris needs to recalculate everything and come in and look at something different. So that is where we learned once we knew that the state had approved what we refer to as the super COLA, is that that amount was actually coming in higher than our property tax amount as if we were to be looking at qualifying us for community funded status. Now, remaining in LCFF, local control funding formula status, or state aid funded, means that we don't have to set aside dollars to give to any of San Anselmo or Fairfax resident students who attend Ross Valley Charter. So there's overall not as many dollars overall that they don't go out. So like Lagunitas as an example, if any of you may have been following that school district, is because they're a basic aid school district, because they have students from Lagunitas attending Ross Valley Charter. They have to pay the in lieu property taxes. So any school district in Marin that's community funded, and if they have students attending, then they do the in lieu. So there's just kind of going back a little bit over our history of what we kind of thought and anticipated where we might be, looking forward to this school year. So looking at these, they're just some sample or examples that Chris did the calculation on, just to kind of give a sense of, you can look at your per pupil amount that you get, but then kind of extrapolating that and looking at what might it mean on a classroom basis.
How long am I allowed to use the I'm the new guy and I don't know what any of this means?
One more meeting.
One more meeting, cool. So 2 more questions then. 46 districts in California are in the community funded, so property tax, right? Really
coming in high.
Doing well, and a third of those districts are Marin. Okay, so I really like our superintendent, but why do we have so many districts in Marin? But maybe just like Ross, Kentfield, Ross Valley, like, hey, let's just stay like really I don't understand the politics. Maybe that's for a whole nother conversation.
I don't know how much discussion we can have when it's not agendized.
Yeah.
Have a response to that, but I don't think we can talk about it.
Well, and just looking at, you see 2 school districts in San Rafael. So there's San Rafael Elementary and San Rafael High School. San Rafael Elementary is not community funded status, but San Rafael High School District is. So when you also look at what happens around that is another school district also exists within the city limits of San Rafael, and that's Miller Creek. And so they are community funded. So, but they're not part of the San Rafael City Schools. So we'll just let you think about that for a minute, leave that of what would happen in the event that, people probably won't want to join. They will lose their status. It will not be,
So people, okay.
So, but we can have that conversation at another time.
Well, and I wonder, that's just interesting is how do we pool some of these resources to make it more equitable across Marin County?
Yeah, and even looking at the one of the reasons that the state put in place the local control funding formula was to try to equalize funding, and they're looking at it on a student basis. So that's where the unduplicated students come in, and taking a look at those as to, and the state's interest is ensuring that more dollars go to where potential needs of students is. And so the local control funding formula, when it seems like it's a great equalizer, if you will, it doesn't actually turn out to be that when you look at how different districts, going back to the previous slides, in Marin are funded. And that's one of the reasons when with local control, community funded status, for school districts that are in community funded status, some of the districts in Marin have opted not to have a transitional kindergarten program, even though it's mandated by the state. But because the state has added this additional grade level, it is in a sense an unfunded mandate because those districts did not receive any of the additional dollars that the state was putting forth for TK. And so when we're looking at, we don't have a choice as to which status we're in. And I don't know that anybody would be interested in giving up what they have.
That's the challenge.
That might be the challenge, yeah. But we'll get into a little bit later tonight as we go deeper into our revenues as to potentially some options that we can certainly have some flexibility around. But just in terms of how we're funded, we don't have flexibility around that part of it.
And if I could just add one additional thing related to that. There are 2 districts in Southern California that have discussed and actively looked at joining. One is community funded, one is state aid. As they started actually digging into it, it became a winner versus a loser. And I'm not sure where they're at now. So,
yeah, I get that, yeah.
The MCOE website has a page dedicated to a committee that did a report on that as well. I think it was like 2011 or something. But you can go and take a look at the report on that.
Who did that?
MCOE, Marin County Office of Education. There's a tab on it.
Great.
Now, I've been talking about what our per student funding looks like. Now, we went through all of this discussion earlier about our funded average daily attendance and how our funded average daily attendance is dropping. And so that plays a part into these calculations. So just because our per student funding went up 12.6%, I think the number was, doesn't mean that that's actually what we're getting. That's a per student. When you look at total revenues, when looking at our parcel tax and our LCFF revenues and looking at all of the districts in the county, we were the 3rd highest. But again, looking at most of all the districts to the left are community funded. So all of the lower funded districts for this particular comparison, 21-22 to 22-23. To the districts that are right of us, only one of them is community funded. That is Ross. That means that their property taxes went up 8.11% in essence, and their parcel tax. The other 2 districts are state aid funded districts, just like the Ross Valley School District. Now, part of the reason that I'm showing this is because with everybody having the 13.26% COLA, and everybody having a little bit different parcel tax, your percentage will be less than that COLA, but their numbers aren't dropping anywhere near ours. And I want to point out that has to do with our drop in enrollment and funded average daily attendance. And so that's really, really critical when looking at our total revenues and the picture of the district. And again, those are driven directly off of our funded average daily attendance, and you see that drop. So it's as we receive lower funded average daily attendance, that rate will be changing each and every year, total revenues, as opposed to per student funding. The other thing that I want to point out is there is, and I know this is obvious, so please forgive me for being Captain Obvious on this one. There is a direct correlation between the funded average daily attendance and our funded revenues. And so I know we see on this particular slide, our funded revenues are dropping, but they don't directly correlate to our cost of living adjustments, the per student funding. And so I just want to point that out. They're not the same. And that's really the reason I'm showing it. It's based upon that funded average daily attendance, not necessarily your COLA, your per student funding. Now, I did want to share, because there were a lot of questions that we were getting when we were going through and doing the superintendent coffee chat, as well as when via email. We were getting questions as to what would the teacher salary schedule look like based upon our proposal. And this is just based upon the proposal from 3.8. And so that was the district's first offer. And so when looking at the data provided by the teachers and looking at what our teachers' salary schedule would look like, that increase, which was 7% on schedule, amounts to us moving to the sixth from the bottom. And so that's important to note. So we would not be at the bottom of the schedule. At BA plus 60, there would still be 4 districts less than us. At BA plus 75 on step 12, we would be second from the bottom. But then at Supermax, which is basically your highest salary, we would actually still have 3 districts below us. So based upon the information that we have, we know that we would not be at the lowest end of the salaries countywide. And part of the reason that we were looking like we were at the bottom on everything is because most of those districts had already settled. And so looking at Ross Valley, we hadn't had a salary increase yet. So that's why we just wanted to make sure that the governing board and the public knew that we would not be at those levels. And the other thing that's important to note is that's just the on-schedule amount, 7%. When looking at everything that we offered, our total proposal was actually between the stipend increases and also the health and welfare. It was 8.01%, which is above that amount that we were looking at. I think I have this slide. Sorry, if I could go back real fast. I know I have it.
Which one are you looking for, Chris?
It's the one that shows our 7.68 right there. Slide 24.
Okay.
So the 8.01% is in excess of that 7.68% increase in revenues. And so that was, the district has put out a pretty significant offer. And so I wanted to point that out as well.
Can I ask another question? So you probably, I don't know if we'll know this, but the Larkspur Port of Madera is the one you compared us to. They've got essentially $8,200 more money per classroom per year based on the funding, but yet their teachers are, getting a little bit less on average, maybe, really quick looking at this, like they're to the right. Why is that?
There's lots of factors that also impact your expenses.
Okay.
And some of that has to do with your class sizes as well. If your class sizes are higher or lower, you might, if you have higher class sizes, you might be able to offer a higher salary, those types of things. So there's pluses and minuses to everything. The negative outcome to that would be you would have higher class sizes and impacts negatively, potentially, your education. So there's lots of things that go into making those numbers.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I know there's a lot of information there. So, and again,
same thing with San Rafael Elementary, right? They're getting $25,000 more money per classroom per year, yet their teacher salaries are about the same.
Right.
So
So it doesn't directly correlate with the rationale of why.
Not
on our
100%.
side, right?
It's not an easy issue, really. I guess would be my takeaway from it.
I mean, we'd have to, really take a look at their budget, in terms of
it's
their
just
presentations to look at where do their dollars go and, what percentage of their budget goes toward salaries and benefits, all the cost for.
Yeah, and ours, whatever, the 75.5% goes to salaries and benefits. And does that include the pensions? Where does that?
Or insurance.
For insurance?
Yeah.
That is. So ask your question one more time.
So the 75.5%
that includes pension costs. It's all of our benefit costs, which are statutory benefits plus our health and welfare.
Okay.
And there are other statutory costs, not just the pension fund. So we do have other statutory benefits that are added into those total costs for an employee.
Yeah, and so kind of going back to what we were looking at, again, this is the cost of 1%, just to kind of keep an eye on the total dollars that were put on out by the district. So it's a significant amount. And this is that slide. Again, I knew it was later, I just didn't know exactly where. And again, coming back, we were looking at 8.01%. And we did talk about this slide earlier. It's also the same as, I believe, slide 24. Now, as you look, wow, kind of cuts off a little. Looks like it says something else up there. This is our revenues. And the one thing that's important to note is that our revenues in our general fund really are broken apart between unrestricted and restricted. What does that mean? So if you ever hear me use the term categorical, those types of phrases, I'm referring to restricted programs. And restricted programs, and I've listed some of them, programs like the YES dollars that come in, YES Foundation, our parcel taxes, COVID funding, special ed, routine restricted maintenance. Those are things that come in with specific strings tied to them. You can only use them in a certain way. And so those are shown on the right here, which is our restricted revenues. And you can see, looking at our restricted revenues, our parcel tax is 39% of those revenues. And then you have federal and state total revenues of $16 million. If you were to add up all of those dollars, you would see that it doesn't necessarily add up. And the reason for that is between our restricted and unrestricted, we have what's called encroachment. And we have programs that don't fully fund themselves or don't fund themselves, things like special education and the routine restricted maintenance, where we have to match those dollars.
And cafeteria.
And cafeteria. So you see that in there. On the unrestricted side, the single largest source of revenues are LCFF dollars, 96.4%. That's our attendance. So those are, when we talk about unrestricted, it's driven off of our attendance. And when you combine them, this is what it looks like. And we did talk about these numbers earlier. Again, between parcel tax and LCFF, when combined, unrestricted and restricted, those are 75.2% roughly. On the expense side, again, between unrestricted and restricted, with those specific things that are tied in, on the restricted side, our salaries and benefits are at 71.2%. But when looking at our unrestricted general fund, and I know Marcy always brings up, I thought our percentage was higher. It used to be higher than that 75. And that's because we have so much in COVID funding and others that aren't necessarily tied directly to salaries and benefits, which we didn't have those years ago. So those
And those are one-time dollars.
They are one-time dollars. Eventually we'll spend them down and our percentages will go back up. And you can see that on our unrestricted side, 80.6%. Again, we are a business of people, and we teach. And so that is exactly why you see the 80.6%.
And I'd like to stay here just, well, can I do it here? Just looking at on the expenses where we see, with the Yes Foundation parcel tax. So we can look at that in terms of revenues or expenses. So the Yes Foundation funds the district's art and music programs as well as library books. And they used to fund a little bit more other types of programs, but since the pandemic hit, they have had to cut back on what they are able to fund. So as an example, they used to fund poetry. That was not a district program. So the district programs are funded by Yes, that are art and music and library books. And so since the pandemic hit, the Yes Foundation hasn't been able to raise enough dollars for what the give to the district is for the district funded programs. And so that's another, if you will, we'll call it an encroachment for now, related to what the general fund has had to cover, which is the less dollars that are coming in by the Yes Foundation. And they're doing a bang-up job to try to go out and raise the dollars. And they're seeing lower participation, and in some cases, the folks who are giving are increasing the amounts they give, but the total participation rate is lower than what they have seen. So on a per family or per giving, because they have their main sources of their donations come from business donors as well as family giving campaigns. And so that's where they get their dollars to be able to provide the district. They also operate a theater program, but the theater program isn't paid for out of the ask. It is a self-funded program for the children who participate in theater, 3rd through 8th grades. And so that isn't really an area where their money comes. Now, the parcel tax was passed just
2018.
Thank you, 2018. And we have 6 years left on the parcel tax. And what the group who put forth the campaign for the parcel tax passage was to ensure that it did pass. So when you're taking a look on if we can go back to the revenue side for a second, Chris, and maybe
this one or the double?
I think that one's fine because it's big and people can see it. So the 14.4%, that is what our parcel tax brings in, is close to $5 million of our budget. It's very critical to the budget is the passage of that parcel tax. And then the parcel tax also was passed with very specific language. As an example, it cannot be used for any administrator raises or salaries, and it cannot be used for any of the pension costs. So there are very specific rules, if you will, as to that passage. And so in order to ensure or do what they could to ensure that the parcel tax would pass is they actually lessened or lowered the annual escalator. And so we were at that point the highest passage rate of any district that has gone out for a parcel tax in Marin County. And since then, a couple of other districts, as you might have read about, Novato didn't pass their parcel tax is using one example, didn't pass their parcel tax on the first go around, and they were successful in the special election in March. And so the parcel tax is absolutely critical. Now, one of the other questions that has come from our community is how can we increase revenues? One person who just happens to have their own business talked about increasing their costs so that they could afford to pay their employees more. And so kind of likening to if we increase our charges, if you will, then it will just follow that will be able to then pay for higher salaries. And the biggest part of what you can see from our budget isn't anything, we can't charge for public education. It's a free education for families, so we're unable to charge. The only place that we can charge are parcel tax, because that does directly impact parcels. So we could pass a higher per parcel as well as a higher escalator. And pass that cost directly on to our taxpayers. That's one way to charge more, if you will. And the other way would be for more giving to the Yes Foundation so that they can fully fund what they hope to be able to provide the district for art and music and library books. And then the other thing that we can do to try to increase revenues is to increase our attendance. Of course, to increase our enrollment would be amazing and fantastic. But once we have more kids in the district, we also need to be sure they're attending school 180 of the days. That's how many student days we have. Because for every day that students aren't in school, we lose a percentage. And when we did our superintendent cabinet chat at Hidden Valley, some of the parents there were like, we need to know, like, how many more students need to attend school on a daily basis to really increase that? What can we do as parents? So we're working on, and we got specific with them, like, help us to know how to message. So you tell us from a parent perspective what's going to matter. And so that we can try to put a message out there. They all agreed that by putting the daily amount, no, that's not going to do it. That amount isn't, but a percentage of how many more kids would be helpful to know. So the families know too that, if we do have a lot of breaks during the school year. We went from just taking Thursday and Friday off of our fall break. That was all that used to be taken off there. And then when we did an analysis of how many kids came to school that week of Thanksgiving, we saw that the attendance had really dropped off. So we, as like many other school districts in Marin, went to a fall break. And then we have our 2-week break at winter, and then we have a midwinter break in February, and then spring break, of course, as well, and then, of course, the summer break. And so for the 180 days, to try to see what we can do to increase attendance. So those are some ways that we can directly impact our revenues. But besides more family giving or increasing our parcel tax and attendance, there's really not much else that we can do because we can't charge. Now, our parent clubs also raise money, but their main purpose and function is for community building. So they do help to fund to be sure that all students at a school get to participate in field trips. The field trips are, the cost of that is paid for by the parents. There are some charges that we can do. So you'll see in, I don't have it off the top of my head, but what we can charge families for or for different elements of schooling is all outlined in one of our board policies or board bylaws. And so there are elements related to that we do charge. So field trips is one, but there's not much else. So like if a child wants to participate in, let's say, White Hill sports, we can't charge them to participate in the clubs and activities and sports and things like that. So that's where our parent clubs are hugely helpful, and to ensure that all of our children at any one school and across all of our district schools can have roughly the same educational or extracurricular type of experiences. And that's why we have what's called a roundtable agreement, to try to ensure some parity. We've been working all year long on a roundtable subcommittee to try to look at revamping our roundtable agreement. It isn't really user easily friendly, and I will say from experience of not having encountered it prior to becoming superintendent and then trying to understand it. It's not a document that you can just pick up and clearly understand. It takes people with historical, institutional knowledge to help understand the roundtable agreement, and that's our goal, is to change that so any person who picks it up will completely understand the elements of that, and really looking at ensuring parity across all schools so that no matter which school your child attends, elementary school, they're going to feed into White Hill. And so ensuring that we have that kind of parity of experiences. Not that every one of our schools has to do the exact same thing, because they don't. Each one of our elementary schools has their own community and own kind of flavor there. But that's really, so that those dollars that parent clubs raise do not come to the district at all. They're for site parent club use and expenditure. But that's the kind of the overview of what where we do have any amount of flexibility. And then it was asked by one of the parents, this may have been at the Manor chat, is there something, like could we pass another parcel tax now? And so, just thinking about that, yeah, we absolutely can travel down that path, but we would have 2 parcel taxes going at the same time. So then there would have to be a lot of language. And we need to ensure, as I was explaining to the parents, please stay engaged with us. We haven't settled negotiations. We're not finished at all. But what we need to be doing is ensuring that at the point where we are going to be going out for another parcel tax, that we, because it has to be passed by the community, not people with children in our schools. And the majority of Fairfax and Selma residents do not have children in our schools. And so we need to make sure that we are engaging our community and keeping them positive with us so that it will pass. One of the other elements that Chris talked a little bit earlier is there is the ability for an opt-out of the parcel tax for seniors. And so any person who is 65 or older can opt out of paying the parcel tax to the school district. And I think we have a large number of opt-outs.
Every year.
Every year. And so folks, as they're aging into that bracket, will come and provide the form to our business department so that they're not charged that parcel tax. And then if anybody who does have a property tax statement looking at the Tamalpais, so anybody who lives in San Anselmo and Fairfax is going to have the Ross Valley School District parcel tax, the Tamalpais Union High School District parcel tax, and then I'm not sure of what the other parcel amounts are for Fairfax as an example, but I can say for San Anselmo residents, there's a library tax, there is an ambulance tax, there's also a fire tax also, and that may be countywide. I just don't know about Fairfax. And so, that was also what that group did, the parcel tax campaign folks, is to take a look at everything that could impact to ensure that it passed, because it would be a huge hit, $5 million annually with a little bit of an escalator. So that is a big part of our budget, and we want to make sure that we can continue. The difference between a parcel tax and a bond, just in case anybody's confused, is bonds cannot be used for people. Bonds are for facilities, upgrades, growth, and that's where when our school district is experiencing the huge amount of enrollment growth, the district, our voters did pass the bond to help us build out our schools to be able to account for the increased enrollment. And so now we're in declining enrollment. It doesn't look like we'll need to pass a bond anytime soon. But as Chris talked about earlier tonight too, you all did approve a refinancing of the bond, which saves ultimately the taxpayers from what they thought they were originally going to be charged. But the bond refi is out over time. It actually decreases the amount of dollars that our community is paying for the bonds that they approved.
And so Dominican University, we're struggling as well there, right? Decreasing enrollment. Small colleges are closing across America, right? But what are the things that we can do here? Is there anything around like facility rentals, like space? Like there were 200.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, and maybe it's not time.
I'd like to get to the end of this budget because I have a lot of these notes that I'd like to go over, and we're kind of throwing them all out there in the middle, and I'd like to be able to throw all these out with some feedback, but I want to get to the end of this so that we can have a thorough finish, because I have questions if it's going to be in here, if I want to bring it up or not, and I don't know what you're going to finish. Is that okay?
That's fair, yeah. I got a big thing in here on increasing revenue, so I can.
Me too. Okay.
So we did talk about the expenses already. Our expenses, what it just did. Yeah, I think
so this slide just shows the revenues and the expenses on one side.
Yeah. And then as we move forward, we have our multi-year projections. This is our multi-year projections as we have them right now.
And this is the last slide before we get to it.
Yes. Yeah. And what's important to note is that this does not include any salary settlements that might take place. And so this is where we're at right now. And as you look at it, we do have a requirement for district our size to have a state mandated in statute reserve of 3%. This district has an additional board policy that increases that an additional 7%. So we have a RVSD board mandate to have a 10% reserve. And
if I could just add to that, just looking at what does a 10% reserve provide in terms of safety net for the district is about 1.5 months of payroll.
Yeah.
So that's just what that 10% reserve would help us with.
And the one thing that we need to think about, the reserves are similar to a bank account. It's more like a savings. Once you spend those dollars, they're gone forever. And so just keep that in mind. The other thing that I want to point out is just what we've heard from the public regarding the salary increases. And the one proposal we did receive, when we estimated the total costs of everything, when looking at the total package that was being requested just for the current year, when you look at things like salaries and benefits, the elementary prep that was being requested, the class size changes, the health and welfare, the salary schedule changes, we costed everything out just for the current year at 33.67% increase in costs. And when we do that math based upon the cost of 1%, just for the teachers, it would have been $3.9 million in 22-23. Then you carry another 3.9 million, then another 3.9 million. And when you add that together, that's a reduction in our ending balances of $11.7 million. Well, with only having a fund balance of 11 million right there, we would be upside down in our fund balances, just accepting the proposal that was provided. And so the other thing that is important to note is this also includes that ending balance that's shown there is unrestricted and restricted. So we would actually be more negative than that because we're not spending out all of our restricted programs just yet, because there's extensions on the COVID dollars. We have a period of time to spend them, so not all of those dollars are being spent out in 1 year. So that's a pretty significant hit when looking at those types of things, and so I think that's just important to note. So, but again, what's not included, and it is important to note, are any future salary settlements. So with that,
thank you, Chris.
I have a lot to say, but I'm going to try to keep it short as possible. I believe, if I'm right, that this budget is not only for, I heard in one of my notes I took today that one of the speakers said that that they had no idea where the money was going, and there was a lack of transparency. And I would disagree with that statement wholeheartedly. I've been through maybe 5 or 6 of these behind this dais, and I believe that although they are difficult to follow, and most people following math for over an hour, it's tough. And there's a lot of acronyms and a lot of numbers and a lot of percentages and a lot of soda pop and colas, and there's all kinds of stuff that make these things very difficult to follow unless you read math. And my first time sitting behind here, I remember it was my second meeting and I had to eat a budget up. And I had eaten one up before, and I've had practice, but they're difficult to get the terms and understand them. So what I do like about you personally is it's easy to follow and very thorough, but it's an awful lot to digest, right? And I think if the goal of this is to be transparent to the public, certainly anyone who wants to read this language, it's here. I disagree that we have a lot of money that is hidden and that we are not transparent. I wholeheartedly disagree with that statement because I follow this math and I understand this math. So for me, I believe anything is here. And if someone can show me something that they would like to find out specifically that is hidden, I would like that data. And I think that if anyone from the public wanted to know where the data was, I think we could ask Chris, and I think he would provide it. So Another thing that I wanted to get on overall is if we are listening to these teachers and we are listening to the community and the state for that matter and understanding the bigger pieces that are involved here, we can recognize that this is a math equation, and this is where Ryan gets out and throws out the we concept. It is not an us and you concept. This is a we concept. I don't think any trustee here does not agree that you deserve as much as we can afford to give you, period. I don't think anybody in here thinks that you are not worth everything we have, right? But I also know as a business owner, there are two general types of people in the world, and they come from two different schools of thought. One signs the front of the checks and one signs the back of the checks. And each of those type of people have to understand different concerns that go with whichever type of person you are, right? And I certainly don't fault anybody for asking for more money. And I certainly, as a trustee, would love to approve whatever you want. But there are things that I would like to have seen in this if this budget was not just for the public, but was for the teachers in general, which I believe are asking for answers. One is we've heard here an increase in enrollment. Yes, we know that. That's obviously important to us. And an increase in enrollment is huge. But specifically in this type of thing, in this type of area where we live in the battles that we have fought, in the competition for children, I would have liked to know what the charter school impact has on this budget. I would like to understand that we can't just be expected to provide dollars for people in this community without understanding where those dollars come from. And specifically, we have been discussing the impact of not one but two charter schools in this community, and I would like that to be provided in these budgets because I think the community is very interested in finding out how that data affects us, how it affects you, and how it affects this community. Another thing I would like to have seen in here is the concept of the parcel tax, and I think Marcy really was very thorough in understanding that, but a parcel tax is a great way to solve this problem too. But again, that's a we issue. That is not an us issue. And I know it's very easy for the people who are signing the back of the checks, and I do not use that in a derogatory sense whatsoever, but when you sign the back of the checks, you get your check and you don't have to think, worry, or understand where it comes from because that's not what you are working for. You have a contract to work for a certain amount of money, and you don't have to worry about it coming because our job on the other side, and not that I sign these checks, but is to make sure that the money is there to provide you what you work for. And that comes with a lot of risk on this side of the check signing. It comes with a concept of balancing budgets. It comes with a concept of looking forward and projecting and making sure that you don't make a poor decision that makes it so one day that the people who sign the back of the checks don't have the money in there that they are promised. Again, this is a we problem. This is a us problem. This is not a administration in a district against teachers. This is a we. So if we're all in agreement, and I believe that we are as trustees, and we hear you, how do we solve this problem? This is where math teachers should be involved, and math teachers should understand that if you want the things you want, how does it affect the budget? And I would like to have seen Chris in this budget personally, for the purpose of explaining and being transparent. I would like to have everything that they asked for show up on this budget and show the public how everything that they asked for affects this budget. Because one side has the right to ask for everything they want, and one side should be listening. And then I know what that looks like because I did some math, but I would like everybody in the room, and when someone wants transparency, I would like them to see what that looks like to this budget. And I would like them to understand, whoa, if we give them everything they ask for, what does that look like? And if we were to decide, yes, let's give them everything we want, we as a board should be able to say, okay, we're listening, here's everything, and now what do we do to keep the business alive, right? Because we are in the business of children, and understanding where does this money come from? Okay, we'll give you this massive, everything you're asking for, and this is what it means. This would be the class sizes, or this would be the programs to be cut, or this would be the people that you would lose, or this would be the things that we would have to consider. And I think when you put these pieces together as a budget, not just the math numbers, which are good, but to show what they're asking for and how it affects us and how the charter school in our community affects us, the we comes to the foreground. The us factor in how we solve this comes front and center. And we can start to ask for solutions. And maybe it's not the teachers asking us, and it's not us asking for understanding, it's the community demanding that, and like Shelley said, I've heard you, and we should go to the state, and I will go, but it's us. And the community should say, hey, this is how a charter school affects you and your budgets and your teachers. Because when we were fighting these entities that were competing for our kids, these are the outcomes. This should not be a surprise to anyone. And declining enrollment, that's a very clear sign that this money is not going to be here. So where does the money come from? Because it's not that no one wants to give the money. I think it's show me how the equation works, and that we can make sure that the business stays alive, to stay in business, to teach children and pay you, and that's the solution of we. And finally, I would like to show how, I would like to show the risks of giving them everything they want, because I believe that it's with understanding that the best negotiations can really come forward. If they understand what they're asking of us, and we understand what the risks are of what happens when we give them, I think that these things tend to solve themselves. And that is my soapbox.
I think that another thing that is really important is where we are right now is very, very, very painful, especially for our teachers. It's painful for us, as you see from these numbers, that the board is also in a very difficult place. But I worry about the sustainability of, do we come back to this every couple of years? And what's happened is all of these schools in California are subject to the clown car policy of the way schools are treated in this state, okay? And we need to find some solution, rather than let's get on a bus and go up to the state. But at some point, there has to be some collective think tank. There has to be some collective place where all of the districts can say, this isn't working, Governor. And it is clown car policy. That's what I see it. And there are schools and districts that are able to perhaps think outside the box. Have we talked to those districts and said, how are you working with this, what we're getting from the state? But the sustainability of all of the public schools in California are a problem. And we're going to be sitting here doing this over and over again. And I'm not quite sure, being a new person on this board, what the answer is. But for the seasoned people here, that you talk about, what are the steps we can do that are logical, that are impactful, that we may not see for 3 or 4 years. But when 3 or 4 years rolls around, we can look back and say, we did the work, and we're much better off for it. I know I'm speaking from a high theoretical, let's go forward basis, but we are dealing with state and the way it determines how we are funded and how we perhaps survive and how we perhaps lose or retain quality individuals. So, and those are the long-term solutions. I heard the public comments tonight talk about what are the long-term solutions, what are the ways we can think outside of the box. And those two things for me are paramount. We'll do what we can with what we have. We've transparently shown that, and I think a little more information would help, right? But we have to think about it, because as we send our 3rd and 4th graders or even younger off to these wonderful schools that we have, I know a lot of us are thinking about what colleges they're going to go to, right? If we're lucky. We have to think the same thing as our schools. We have to look at them as our children, and what will they look like in the future? And what do we have to do today to make sure they look that way? And I'm just seeing us taking it all from the state. It's a tough place to be, but what's our choice here except to find something to agitate collectively?
Yeah, I know that the state legislators, senators, they come to our superintendents. We have monthly meetings, and we have had folks come to those meetings to help. One of the big pushes that we tried to do to, especially our district, thinking that we were going to be in community funded status and knowing that we already had TK. We're doing TK not just because it's state required, but because it's good for children and it's good for the long-term educational benefit to children to have that 2-year kindergarten experience. And so even when we thought we were going to be in basic aid, we were continuing the expansion of the TK program, and by that I mean the months expansion of which children are eligible to it. In basic aid status, community funded, we would not have received the additional dollars from the state to pay for what the state was requiring to maintain a child to adult ratio. So maximum class size in TK is 24, but your adult to child ratio needs to be 12 to 1.
12 to 1.
And so with that, there would have been no additional funding with that. So we did write to numerous times to the state of California to say, you must please support districts that are in community funded. The state, because of maybe it's their wisdom of trying to equalize the funding for community funded districts, they had no, forget how they worded it at the state level, but no pity. I don't think that was the word, but it may have been, for community funded districts and the expansion of TK. But it was also something that a lot of the districts that are community funded ended up not implementing. They never have because it wasn't a funded program by the state. So I think the attempts of school board members and or administrators to try to go push on the state, as both you and Ryan have talked about, is that collectiveness about really if the state, Prop 13 changed it all.
Yeah.
And so back when that was approved by the voters, it changed the funding status and the way that school districts in the state of California are funded. And it forever changed it. And so it did put us from a much higher standing compared to other states in the United States for funding of schools to bottom in that. So it is going to take a different kind of an effort. We can do things locally, but then it is actually at the whatever the voters might approve and or the givers, to yes, as an example. It's contingent upon that. Is the goodness of our community members to continue to fund what the state doesn't do. So you're right, Chris, it is going to take a massive change at the state level to do that. We have attempted, got really disrupted with COVID, but an attempt to really try to see what we can do to increase our enrollment. We do know that from the parents who volunteered with me to take a look at marketing and branding, we do know that families have affinity with the school their child attends, not with the district, but with the school. And so how do we ensure that the folks who have a choice and an option, with so many options, in the towns of San Anselmo and Fairfax, we have 2 charters, we have 2, well actually one's moved out, 2 privates, one moved to another town in Marin County, and then one of the other privates that used to be in place, St. Rita's, they're no longer here, but we have, St. Anselm, San Domenico, who do pull kids in addition to the charters away. We also have other private schools in Marin County that aren't in our boundaries, but our children are going to. Their families, driving them to San Rafael to Mark Day School or to wherever.
Marin Country Day.
Marin Country Day, Marin Primary, Marin Secondary, going to the schools. And so with a lot of the choices that families have, and we know that that's, getting into politics for a second, is the maximizing choices and options that families have to educate. And one of the things that have been talked about is to take the dollars that are given to the public schools and to take some of that and let families take those dollars that their child would have otherwise been going to the school and to be able to take that with them. So that voucher program. So there are a lot of still impacts and attempts to dismantle public education.
Right.
And that's the part that we need to, definitely we have to work on, but ensure that those things don't happen. So how do we get to increase our enrollment when we know that in tracking the data of the kids who've left us, 50% of them have moved out of the area. And so that has to do likely with some families, they have family in other areas, and I think with COVID, with more and more people being able to work remotely, they're able to move to other places. And when the state was looking at the decrease of enrollment for the state of California, where they saw the big exodus is leaving more of the urban and suburban areas and going to the more remote areas. So they're anticipating big increases in those attendance areas. It's definitely a complex problem. You're absolutely right. And we can't do it alone. It's just one school district to try to do it, but whatever we can do here.
And then in terms of the charter attendance, I was looking up under the principal apportionment information on CDE since I was sitting here. The charter schools that have districts that they take kids from that are basic aid community funded, they have to report their attendance. And the reason for that is because, as Marcy was saying, you have to pay a portion of your property taxes to them. And so I was hoping that they would show our attendance, and for us it doesn't show. And that's what I had recalled as well.
When you're in LCFF status,
Yeah.
there's no reporting.
It doesn't show it.
Yeah.
But they did have a spreadsheet at one time last year that we found, so I can certainly take a look to see if it's there for the current year. The problem with looking at it for Hartwood, which is the other charter school in the area, from what I recall, because the district that authorizes them is not a community-funded district, they don't even have to report that information. So I'm not sure.
Even if my logic was, even if you had a hypothetical number.
Yeah, I might be able to look at
a hypothetical number. We're not talking, and the logic is not to be down to the dollar. The object in my eyes, what I'd like to see is what does 20 kids cost us? What does 50 kids cost us? What does 100 kids cost us? So no matter what it is, the details play out in real math.
Yeah.
And also, not only for the teachers who are still sitting here and got to go to work tomorrow to do the job that they want to do, but they can pass on the information to the other people to understand. And you know what else? People who want to go listen in can understand. People can talk about it at the coffee shop can understand. And before you know it, you have really an understanding of how it affects everyone. Because I think everyone would be behind a partial tax for teachers because it's the right thing to do. And when we were involved with partial taxes as a councilman when I was in Fairfax and trying to pass basic service like ambulance service, people understood the importance of that. And you know what? They weighed in, and it passes. And I don't think that what's going on in Los Angeles with this big teacher strike is not in the foreground of everyone. But I don't think it's fair, and that's a rough word to use these days. But I don't think it's necessarily the strongest point to put it on the district when we're just trying to keep a math equation safe and stable for the running of the people business without expecting everyone to understand why we are not able to maybe give everything that someone is asking for, because it's all about understanding, transparency, communication, and truth. And I think that's the step forward.
The only thing I have to really add to that is we don't have a whole lot of control over the money coming into our district. And there are things that we should probably legislate for or work or push it on our state representatives for, like the ADA and pay like funding versus enrollment. Like, why do the kids have to be in the seat? It disincentivizes them to stay home if they're sick. Like, stay home. stay home. So that needs to change. Like the ADA versus enrollment funding is something that needs to be adjusted to the state because that makes a difference. Like those numbers, I mean, dropping from 97% to 96 is huge. That affects us. Not funding the STRS and PERS, the pension stuff, like those numbers are so much higher than they were 15 years ago, and that's not funded. And that we have to pay that. That's a mandate. And just the equity of funding, like the one where it shows $52,000 per student, one of those districts blows my mind.
But they have a very small amount of students to cover a full operating system of school.
That's
so
true.
That's
but
really what
show me the equity there. Like, how does that pan out? Like, I'm sorry, do 20 kids in one school district really need that much money? Like, I don't know. It doesn't seem quite right to me that we have that many basic aid funded schools nearby and we can see the immediate impacts versus our school district funding. So that to me, those are things that we can't control that definitely need to be adjusted up at the state level. But I do appreciate having all the information about ways we do have control because I've worked on parcel taxes for several things. And I know how hard it is to pass them. I know you have a high bar. It's a 2/3 approval rating, so 66%. It's not an easy thing to get. But around here, we have pretty good luck, especially in the Ross Valley. Not just ours, but TAM Union, I've helped on those too. And I think that given the amount of community response that we've heard, a lot of emails, so thank you. I know it takes time out of everybody's day and to come here to sit through these meetings, it's long, I know. But we're hearing everything, and I think that we need some community assistance here to kind of make some of this happen because I think people understand when you say, hey, this is for teacher salaries. It's not for pensions. It's not for administration. We'll go to our teachers. It will help the kids in the classrooms because they'll have teachers that are happy, who've been here, who will stay.
And classified, so the parcel tax.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I agree with Ryan. I think we need some and I think that people here will do that.
And also to add on your great work on parcel work, because I know you've done a lot of it, is as a realtor too, you have to be able to speak dollars. And at the end of the day, it comes down to dollars for what you want, but it is not a hard path to not only support teachers, but good schools increase property values. So you can make a direct correlation to that and speak to the people who would be paying this that actually they're paying themselves. So it's not I don't even think that's a hard sell. I think anyone with common knowledge and equity in a home here who you're asking to pay for the teachers, they're actually paying themselves. So it's not just for ambulances, it's not just for some special group, it's actually something that would pay themselves. So I think that argument would cross all the lines in order to not be pushed back with enough.
More benefit
Yeah.
to schools.
It directly benefits. It's like paying yourself, really.
And luckily, we do have a couple of folks who've said, tell me what I can do to help. So we may be looking at potentially a parcel tax sooner than later. And luckily, we're ripe, actually, with the engagement of our community.
It's great. It's great. And we're able to navigate some of the exemptions of that parcel tax. I'm not familiar with them, but teachers who own homes in the district, should they be paying that, things like that, thinking about the underlying, we were able to do that, right? I just don't know.
I haven't seen that exemption before, but we would just ask in the writing of we have to check with those people. But I've seen other exemptions for this.
So how do we, the community, everybody in Ross Valley, educate everybody else on what we've just learned today around the funding? I think that's one of the things that it's everybody needs to know this, not just the teachers, not just people listening in, but it's people in the coffee shop. People need to know this is the situation.
Cliff notes. No,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it is, and it gets, unfortunately,
But what's the
for the
digestible?
teachers, or anyone, you just got to get pissed off and fed up. And then I think that's where we are. And I think at the end of the day, that transcribes well to your general public. This is not something that it's a Fairfax thing or a San Selma thing. This is a community thing, and I don't think it's a hard sell. And I think that there are people out there that would like to obfuscate this because there are people that are actively working against the district, in my point of view, because this does not suit them. This type of information of how we're affected by charter school competition. There are people who actively don't want that information out there, right? But I mean, if it's factual data, it's factual data. So pushing through the walls and being truthful and leading with integrity and honesty is the path. And there has to be a shortcut, because I don't think people can tolerate that much math.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, what are the clip notes?
You have to come up with the bullet points to, and I think a campaign of understanding can simplify those things. And for those who really do like to read the deeper dive, they're going to be listening to this meeting, and they're going to go through that presentation and that thing, and they can follow it one piece at a time to get a deeper understanding. I think the majority of people just need a 1-minute understanding and the trust of who's telling the information. Because most people aren't going to be able to get through all that.
So what are those nuggets?
What are those clip notes? What are those things? Again, I've been in this position now 4 weeks or whatever it is. Everybody I see is coming and like, how do we educate? How do we let them know? Here's the 5, 10, 20 things that matter most. And if I had a talk track, that would be helpful. Or even if community members, parents, teachers.
It's almost like it's a group of everyone.
Yeah, that's what.
Right, and it's almost like a subcommittee group on. I've been saying this for a long time, but outreach for our district is massively important. We need to get out to these TK preschools. We need to market. This is a competition for children, and let's not sugarcoat it. That's what this is. When we are funded like we are funded, we are competing for children. We are competing, like you said, butts in seats. Doesn't really matter to have the butts in seats. And if we're going to be in a competition, it's about time that we started acting like this is a competition and not just, optics and niceties. And I'm not saying we can't lead with integrity, honesty, and transparency, but that's the message in my mind. We are in a competition for students, for survival as a business entity, for this community, and for our teachers.
And some of the impacts, because we do put information out to the preschools, and when our families come to register, we ask, just anecdotally, how did you hear about this? Where does your child go to preschool? Did you hear about it from them? No, preschool never sent us anything. Yeah. And so one of the things that we do know is an impact of the TK expansion is the concern that preschools have in the area about the impact to their programs.
Yeah, they're going to lose revenue.
Yes,
sure.
They will.
No doubt.
And so, they're looking to also ensure that their programs aren't decimated with that. When we had our parent group who was helping, they helped with outreach to the preschools to see, can we do presentations at your schools? And they, basically said no, because if we open it up to you, we'd have to open it up to every other private charter, whoever might want to come do an enrollment presentation or that kind of thing. And so we're just not set up to be able to accommodate that.
And also, Marcy,
one school,
the we part is not, it's not just us that has to do that messaging. We should not be fighting for survival of the largest community-based asset that we govern. This is a we thing. This is a teacher thing. This is the students should learn about this. This is the community, everyone should understand. So once everyone gets it, then they get either upset enough to get engaged. And once people are upset enough to get engaged, the word just passes. I'm not saying they have to guilt their friends into understanding, but when push comes to shove about, for example, getting vaccinated, there was a lot of pushback on that in the beginning, but after a period of time, everybody understood what COVID was, everybody understood the best scientific ways to stay safe, and started to teach other people why it was important. And that's what I think we have to get to. We have to get everybody to teach everybody who's involved with this bigger game why it's important.
I don't think that Dan's question was answered. That
we started to ask. Yeah, what was that?
It's just, we have this is great, right? But you get into it and I'm in finance and I'm like, I got tired. And so a one-page PowerPoint. The district has no choice on the type of funding we receive. This is the type of funding we get. This means X. X means Y. This is what we can do without debt. This very simple talking points. What solutions? Marcy, you laid that out quite well. This is the solutions we can have. And that kind of gets, sorry, I'm losing my voice. That kind of gets whatever campaign we want to do to get people knowledge, but put something out there. So many emails came to us. So many parents and community members are concerned. The teachers are concerned. We've listened to the public comments. We know what the concerns are. Let's answer them in a high level. We don't need an Excel spreadsheet. Just bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. Is that going to be detrimental to us to put something like that out there?
I don't have the answer to that because I've also heard that because every one of the budget presentations that Chris does, so where there are two attachments. One is the budget itself, so if you want to go into that deep dive into the numbers, it's there. And then there's a PowerPoint, similar to what we have tonight, but many fewer slides. And I think we'd need to do probably an ask and to get that feedback and input is what is the specific nuggets?
What do you need?
Yeah, what do you need?
Or how do you take that 39 pager and make it into one? Have the deepest dive, the middle dive, and the budget for dummies.
Well, let me give you one example.
Cliff notes.
Let me give you a Cliff Note version.
Can we ask ChatGPT how to solve this?
With how complex this subject is, I'm not sure that even they would know. We're funded based upon our average daily attendance, right? And if every child misses one day of school, just one day, and we have 180 days, that's roughly a loss of attendance of 9 ADA, just for one day.
A loss of what?
9
ADA. Average daily attendance.
So what does that really mean?
What does that mean? The numbers.
So out of the number of students we have, 8,000 of the 180 school days, and if every one of our children were up at 1670 or 17, roughly.
You can take either number.
Yeah, whatever number.
Let's just use 1,700.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
1,700 divided by 180, it's roughly 9 average daily attendance. When looking at your...
Across the whole entire school year.
And that's only one day. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because that will amount, looking at these dollar amounts per child that we get, just for sake of argument, let's say it's $10,000 for ease of calculation, $90,000.
Interesting. And also,
see that
That's
is very clear.
But we don't want our kids going to school
But
with
then we don't
COVID.
want, sound like me.
but also
or cold.
A clear understanding, because I can honestly say I was guilty of thinking that as long as I called my kid inexcused, that it would be, we get the money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an outreach concept. Is hey parents, we need all your kids in our schools, number one, and your friends that don't go here. We need them too, and we need your butts in your seats.
Yeah.
And the reason is we want to pay teachers more, to retain teachers, to have great things, to ease the burden on to. That's it. Give them the quick details.
So I actually had something that I wrote up last week when I was getting the flood of emails, and I haven't done anything with it except still editing it. But it could very easily be tweaked to have those numbers added in very quickly. But it's got all of these points that we've talked about tonight. So
oh my God!
Would you like me to send it to you? Okay.
Yeah, as a parent, I don't know that well, why don't we just go to Sacramento on Friday and see Grandma? That sounds nice. They're going to read in the car.
Right.
I'm going to challenge them with math problems and whatever. I'm not. But I'm like, okay, it's just one day. But it adds up.
Everyone's got a grandma.
Everybody's hope, maybe.
And part of the reason I'm
wants to go to
saying
Tahoe.
Yeah, and part of the reason I'm saying that is just before the winter break, the midwinter break, we had one school that had like 25% of the students that were absent on right at the end of the week.
Well, Monday after the Brookside play, a lot of kids were sick.
And so it's a combination of them actually being sick and then a combination of them going to grandma's in Sacramento or in Tahoe or
a lot of grandmas live in Tahoe.
I think that's whatever the thing is.
Yeah, especially on Fridays.
Anyway, I think we're kind of on to something.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Did we want to go back out to the public? Okay, so, public, would you have any comments, questions, feedback for us? Not that we can answer any of the questions because we can't interact, but
We can do that?
you can do that.
Cool. Okay.
3 minutes, you get a 2.5-minute warning from Chris, Chris, just so it's not an interactive thing.
Yeah.
We're
No,
listening.
I got that part.
Okay.
Absolutely. Not interacting. I did, from some of the things that I heard, I do absolutely want to iterate, Chris Carson, that was a very thorough explanation. I've seen several of yours at this point, and as Mr. O'Neill was saying, the clarity in them is wonderful. Thanks to that clarity, I will say that I personally saw that the mandate from the district to offer as much money to us this fiscal year that you have, I saw that number. The offer to us was 1%, and that's basically the number that I saw that was there. So I saw that effort. And in listening to another piece to Mr. O'Neill's take on things, and he's looking at trying to simplify certain arguments, the idea of there's the person who signs the check on the front versus the person who signs the check at the back. That's true. And combining to the point of you guys gave what on its face looks like the best value, the best amount of money that you can offer us as a union, and the realities on the ground for us as teachers is that number is still quantifiably not enough. And I do also want to thank you all. The spitballing that I observed today was kind of fun. The heart that I saw from this entire board and the superintendent is there, and we are grateful for that. And that's not going to be the retaining factor for the faculty members that we have that have increasing daycare, that have their healthcare concerns, that are staring down not being able to afford increasing rent when that comes. So thank you. This is going to have to keep moving forward. And everyone has to keep in mind it is absolutely a we problem. But the best now is not enough.
Thank you. Can you identify yourself? Sorry. Can you identify yourself?
My name is Virginia Foxton. I am a parent in the district for Hidden Valley and White Hill, as well as an 8th grade English teacher at White Hill Middle School. And the question that I wanted to ask is why, in identifying the no-win situation and that there is not a difference in where the funding is coming from, that you're running a business and it has to be profitable, or it has to be able to maintain itself for the foreseeable future. The way that we are set up as a district right now, the teachers are paying the cost of keeping the existing scope and service of Ross Valley School District as it is. So scope and service, when scope and service increases, your cost increases. Your scope and service, when your expenses decrease, you can pay more for your scope and service. So while the board's mandate is to keep class sizes and programs and to maintain everything that already exists for the school district, it comes at the teacher's expense because we can't sign the front of all of our checks to pay for all of the things that need to be paid for to maintain living within a 1-hour radius of this school district. So as management, it is not a fun task to figure out what to do. But as management, you have to lead this ship in the direction that is going to keep the best talent and the affinity towards the schools where the students will want to go, and where they're going to want to be at school, and they're going to be provided with those gap services by teachers who really care about them and feel really valued in the district where they work. The second thing I would like to say is that it is not a popular thing to say within this room, and I have respect for the people that I say this to, but from a management standpoint, there is concern about how trustworthy, because of we watched an HR position disappear in the district, and we saw that the position was not refilled, but the salary was redistributed within the individuals managing that work. We know that the workload has increased over the course of COVID, and that we went through that. We are coming through. There are some concerns that we can't trust our management to do what is right behind closed doors if we don't know what is happening and why decisions are being made, like an HR position being redistributed to individuals' salaries within the district office. And that is an example of what I'm hearing. And so because there's not a feedback loop, I wanted to present that as something that is a concern that is being talked about within the teaching community more so than in the parent community. So just, I want you to be aware of that in your conversations while you're trying to identify what money we do and do not have and what services will sustain us as a district. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So I know that we're not really supposed to discuss a whole lot more, but I did have a question about the HR dollars specifically, because I was here when that went, I think, and so was Ryan. I don't think any of my other co-trustees here. But my understanding was it wasn't the full amount was transferred over. There was other things that happened. I don't know.
I believe it was a cost savings move.
Yeah, I believe we saved quite a bit of money
And
doing that.
we added the additional job description to the individuals that it was added. I mean, portion was added, but I remember it was approved with a 5-0 vote because it was designed to increase a little workload, but saved us money.
Yeah.
It saved the district roughly $100,000 by doing away with that position.
Yeah.
The amount that was redistributed to Julia, myself, Chris Carson, and Lori Ross did not equate to the total amount. And that is on that board agenda item, in which the position was done away with and redistributed.
Yeah, and you can go back and look at that meeting because we talked about that, and it was applauded as a cost savings move for the district at the time, and I was all for it.
The other, cost saving measures we have done is related to every time we have an open position, we do take a look at the position and do we need to replace it exactly as it does exist at the time, or can we do away with it? Can we not do it? And so we do have the HR director position did go away completely, redistributed some of the duties with definitely an increase to some of our salaries, but not to the full amount of the cost of a director position. When Cynthia Steckley left, the superintendent, board, and chief business official, we reduced that position from 12 months to 10 months.
Yeah.
And when our student services assistant left, and Meredith Woodward now sits in that position, that was also reduced from a 12-month to 10-month. When COVID hit, we laid off almost all of our classified positions, and we reinstated some but not all. Like we do have one fewer technology positions in our district, so we're now a technology department of 3 as opposed to 4 that we've had. We do need to have, there's not a state mandate for like the number of campus supervisors per number of students, but we try to maintain a ratio of 75-1 out on the yards. But we don't just look at those paid positions as that. There are the site administrators might be out there. We do have built into our elementary PE teacher job descriptions, job duties to provide activities on the yard during the lunchtime to help
help those kids be able to access things. That's at our elementary level.
I think then we talk about actually in that removal of the HR position, that it was very possible that position was going to have to come back at
You
some
did.
point.
You were very adamant that
Yes.
we really needed to analyze and look at the ability of
Right.
whether or not
The cost of savings money versus burning out the people that took
Yeah.
on the additional things, and I think that was, and so that's all been documented in the minutes as a big concern, because just because people took on more responsibilities and were compensated for it, it was a cost savings move. But I also was very nervous about burning out the people that took on the additional work, because take on too much stuff, it could all implode anyway.
But how have the teachers have taken on additional stuff as well, and is that available to them too? The PE teacher now doing additional yard work duty.
It's not now. That's always been as part of the job. It's built into how their overall full-time equivalent is built in, is that time equated to basically as another class, if you will. So to how their FTE is determined and calculated. It's built into it. It's not a change of what we've done. It's always been that way for our elementary PE.
And I think we're going to have to get really creative in all this stuff. And I think everything's going to always have to get looked at. When times get tight like this, steak is tough to buy. Some ground beef or something like that, or something a little bit less expensive is you have to stretch it out. So I think all creative solutions. I think part of my notes had creative solutions as a very important aspect of that. But again, that's a we problem as well. I go back to it because as soon as it becomes us versus them, you can just look at today's politics. Everybody walls up, nothing gets done. Everybody fights, nobody finds solutions. So I'm convinced that it's not us and them. It's everyone. And we may have some crazy people in there, but they're our crazy people. So let's bring it all together and figure it out.
So it was August of 2021. So I think it was the September 14th board meeting, but August, I think, was when some of that stuff was going on. So.
Yeah, because we did it in 2 parts. We did a discussion about it, and then
So if you want to go hunt through the,
use the search button for that.
I don't know how to get out of it. So I'm gonna close this. Okay, so I think, unless we had any more comments here from my fellow trustees. Okay, so I am going to move on to the next presentation action item, which is the RVSD Home to School Transportation Reimbursement Plan.
Can we take a quick break though to go to the restroom?
Okay, yeah. All right, so time out. Time out. All right, we'll get to that shortly. Okay, and so we are moving on to item E3, RVSD Home to School Transportation Reimbursement Plan 2022 to 2023.
Thank you. And what the state has done is they put into place what's called a home to school transportation program. And on its face, it really does appear as if it is new money to school districts for transportation. But when, and there were a lot of questions at MCU we had of the state to be sure that, like districts like ours, we don't have a transportation system for our students. There are required mandates that school districts must provide transportation to special education students when home to school transportation is written into their IEPs, as well as for students experiencing homelessness. And so the amount of dollars that the state is putting in place is to help basically reimburse districts for that unfunded mandate. Now, some districts in the state of California do have a transportation system with yellow buses and their own kind of transportation. Because our district did not get in on the ground level way back when, many years ago, on that type of transportation, there wasn't money for us to start a bus program, as you will. So what our district has done is been able to provide the mandated required types of transportation, which are for those 2 student categories. And when we first were looking at the transportation program and what the reimbursement might be to the district, so this amount in here is actually higher
on the board agenda. Then when Chris worked on writing the actual transportation plan, there was a calculator in there to do the math. So we actually would get reimbursement of $174,960.41. And so with writing the transportation plan, it's not something we have to submit to the state, but we just have to have the board approve the transportation plan by April 1, and then it needs to be updated annually thereafter. Chris can explain better than I about how the funding is calculated in terms of what a district's reimbursement is. And I tried to explain that in here in writing it, but maybe said a little differently from Chris's vantage point as our chief business official.
So when taking your total expenses, what they're looking at are everything that we have under a certain budget code. And so when you look at it, for us, it's all of our special education transportation. And so what they're doing is they're looking at how much we spent last year. And so last year we did spend actually $489,000. As I was looking at it, what I was doing is I was looking at it in terms of order of operations a little different. The actual calculation, they then calculate out and say, okay, we'll reimburse a total of 60% of that total, which for us is $293,000. Except that they already, within our LCFF calculator, they give us a portion for transportation built into the LCFF. And I believe it may have shown on our calculation that was on our slides earlier. It's just kind of buried at the bottom of it. They haven't given any COLA increase to that the entire time that the LCFF has been in place. It's one of those things that just didn't receive it, and so it's just a set dollar amount. And for us, it's $118,000. They are now starting to apply COLA to it. So you have the $293 that they say they'll pay, less the $118 that they already pay us, and then the difference is the $174. And so
it's a calculation based on what you spend minus the amount that we already get, that little portion through the LCFF calculated amount. And then there's a 60% of what you had spent above and beyond the LCFF amount, if that's easily translatable.
It's detailed.
You just threw out a number that I didn't hear before, and I'm like, where'd that come from?
Yeah. And then the other thing that's built into this, they want to know what our budget is in the current year. And the amount is shown within the document as well. It's a substantial increase. One of the things that drives our special ed transportation is the number of students that we have that are being transported. And so if our number of students that in transportation increases, so too does our cost. But then it also, there's cost escalators as well. We have a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, that provides the transportation for us. It's through the RIN. Basically, it's through the SELPA that puts it together. And
the Special Education Local Plan Area.
Yeah. And so we have Dennis he works through that program and works through the transportation for all of our students. And when he tries to provide through a yellow bus service for all of our students, and when we have instances where they can't find a yellow bus, they'll actually provide other types of services. And so ultimately that's why we have those discrepancies in costs.
And what you'll see on the attached plan is where the districts need to prioritize any amount of this reimbursement. So first and foremost is to the students with disabilities when written into their IEPs, and homeless students experiencing homelessness. And then the third category, before you can look at your non-unduplicated students, will be to take a look at your free and reduced. So when we're looking at how Ross Valley will utilize these reimbursement dollars is not to expand the use. One of the things that we've looked at and in our consultation is with our groups is to talk about the yellow bus program that we have that currently serves Hidden Valley and White Hill, there are many more of our students in the district who attend Brookside, Manor, Wade Thomas as examples that also fall into those categories of where they may be free and reduced kinds of kids, low socioeconomic or economically disadvantaged. And so we're looking at trying to ensure that the dollars that we're getting through this reimbursement program are going back into our general fund before we look at where to expend the dollars next, because there's not a plan with the Yellow Bus program to expand to any of the other schools. As Chris and I attended a JIPA meeting last week, we're aware of what the proposal is, which is continuing for Hidden Valley and White Hill students. So it doesn't mean that in the future, because this is an annual reapproval of the plan, that we can't start to take a look at where we're utilizing the dollars. We're getting reimbursed from the state, but our recommendation is to reimburse the general fund for the 2 student groups that have been mandated historically by the state and federal government. And so with that, part of the transportation plan process requires that there were consultations with different of our education partners. And so with our teachers, our classified parent guardians, the air quality management, the other transportation agencies that exist. And MCOE, on behalf of all districts in Marin, did meet with the air quality. And after that meeting, air quality put a note up on their website. So when Shelley Hamilton, our board president, offered on our district's behalf to reach out, because that was before we understood that MCOE had reached out. When she was going to find a phone number for air quality to reach out to, she saw that their website says, if you're reading this webpage and you're a school district and you're needing to consult with us around the home to school reimbursement plan, consider yourself consulted. Check the box. They didn't want to talk to anybody. We did have our own conversation with Transportation Authority of Marin and Marin Transportation Agency, MTA and TAM. They asked for a meeting with us, and we thought that would be great because we now had dug into what is the home to school reimbursement plan all about. And then we were lucky enough to have Bree Brown from MCOE's business department attend that meeting with us to help us and help that group unpack what is this program really about at the state level and what are they looking to do. Unfortunately, it's not new money that helps to enhance our program at all. It just basically reimburses. So it is known as a home to school transportation reimbursement plan. And so by your approving the plan this evening, we are able to then be in compliance with the state to be able to get these dollars for the 22-23 school year.
You said that goes into the general fund.
It would go back in because that's where the encroachment for those costs, we're paying for that out of the general fund to have that go back into it.
So did anyone else have any questions before I go for public comment?
And then let me just say one thing.
Okay,
and then the requirements related to approving the transportation plan, unlike anything else that we've seen from the state, did require that we allow for input or verbal as well as written input. And that's why we had that separate item on our agenda under communication this evening for correspondence and communication with the board regarding the transportation plan. So that was at the top of our meeting. So we had that, and we didn't receive any kind of written input, and I don't know if we have public. So if there are any questions by the board, then out for public comment.
Yeah. Did you guys have any questions?
No questions.
No.
Public?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if we do not have any further discussion on this item, I will entertain a motion.
Are you making the motion or just entertaining it?
I'm entertaining it.
I'll make a motion to approve the RVP 2023 Home to School Transportation Reimbursement Plan.
Second.
Okay, so the motion and a second, Ryan?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Dana?
Aye.
Rachel? Aye. Okay, so that is approved.
Thank you.
Yes, okay, and then we need to recess back into closed session.
All right, and with that, because the only thing we will be doing when we come out, there are no other agenda items on tonight's meeting. We will have Chris take us back online so that Jorge and Teresa can go home for the evening. And then that way, for any of our recording, the folks will be able to hear. And we'll be able to have the end of the meeting up there, so up to our adjournment.
Okay, so we will recess into closed session. It's 9:54. All right, it is 10:42 and we are reconvening from a closed session. I have nothing to report out. There were no decisions made on any of the items that we discussed tonight.
No action taken.
Yeah, no action taken. So, nobody has anything else? Let's see, if we have to adjournment. So, unless anyone has anything else to add, I will adjourn this meeting.
At 10:43 p.m.
Yes, right.